Jon Snow stood at the lip of the icy precipice and surveyed the vast, unforgiving land that stretched before him. A silent wind whipped over the snow, rattling the plates of his armor beneath the heavy furs. The air smelled of frost and iron, and each breath filled his lungs with a cold so deep it felt ancient. Beneath his gloved fingers, long claws pommel pressed back, an assurance of steel and resolve in a place that felt like the end of the world. Around him, the small company he had led beyond the wall shifted anxiously on their feet, rustling in the stark quiet. They all knew the stakes of this journey: to capture proof of the undead threat and present it to the South. Proof that the White Walkers were real, that the army of the dead was real. Proof that demanded an alliance among all mortal enemies because this war was greater than crowns or thrones. Yet each of them felt the creeping dread along their spines. This was no place for the living, and every hour spent here risked awakening the great death that roamed these glaciers, commanded by a terrifying power. Though Tormund Giantsbane cracked jokes when the tension grew too fierce, even the red-bearded wildling wore a more somber face now. Gendry's breath came fast, leaving little clouds in the air as he tightened his gloves. Jorah Mormont rested a hand on Jon's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie and warning both. The Hound, unyielding in his scowls, scanned their surroundings as if daring the hidden enemy to come forth. Beric Dondarrion's one good eye glimmered with grim determination. The company's morale hung on the razor edge of uncertain hope, and the knowledge that Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms by her own claim, would come if they were in need. She had promised. Jon prayed her faith in him, and his faith in her, would be enough. They trudged onward, forging a path through knee-deep snow that shifted beneath their boots like fine sand. The wind keened, cutting into exposed skin, spurring them forward. A hush enveloped the group whenever they spotted movement at the corner of their vision. The icicles hung from bent trees, and the wind howled with a voice that could have been the dead themselves, moaning across the expanse. They walked for hours, or perhaps days. Time was impossible to gauge in that land of endless white and gray skies. When finally they saw motion that was not a swaying tree or blowing flurry, everyone froze. Beyond a slight ridge, a small knot of undead shuffled aimlessly. Leading them was a figure with pale skin, hair like bleached bone, and eyes that glowed crystalline blue. A White Walker. Jon signaled for silence. He moved down into a crouch behind an outcrop of rock. His party followed suit, hearts pounding loud enough that each man feared it would attract attention. They had come for precisely this, to capture one of the whites and prove to the world that the threat was real. But knowledge of that grim necessity did not make the confrontation any less terrifying. These were creatures out of legend and nightmare, and the ones who walked behind them were worse. The Night King himself was not in sight, which was a small mercy. They waited. The undead patrol shuffled closer, never once noticing the living men hidden in the cleft of rock. The group was small, perhaps a handful of whites and one White Walker leading them. A more hopeful number than the thousands rumored to comprise the Night King's army. Jon and his companions prepared an ambush, breathing shallowly to keep their presence concealed. It would be a dangerous maneuver, but they had no choice. When the creatures approached, Jorah threw a rock to the side, drawing the whites' attention. As one, the men sprang up from their hiding places. Jon led the charge, Longclaw glinting in the pale light, its Valyrian steel hungry for the White Walker's frosty flesh. Tormund roared like a bear awoken from slumber, his axe singing through the icy air as he hewed into the first white. The creature's bones cracked, and decayed flesh fell away. But it still snapped its jaws, reaching out with skeletal hands until Tormund's second blow destroyed it. Gendry smashed another with his warhammer, sending shards of frozen bone flying. Jon's focus narrowed on the White Walker. He could see the creature's inhumanly pale features, serene yet terrible, as it swung a blade of ice. They clashed, and the shriek of contact between Valyrian steel and the Walker's weapon rang out across the snowscape. Jon felt the jarring impact up his arms. He gritted his teeth, threw his weight behind his blade, and forced the Walker back. It was strong, inhumanly strong. Yet Jon had fought White Walkers before, and he knew they could be killed by dragonglass or Valyrian steel. He pressed forward, mindful that the whites still surrounded them. Jorah and the Hound brought down 2 more whites. Beric ignited his sword with a flicker of flame, thrust it at the final undead thrall. The thing collapsed in a swirl of soot and flame, leaving a stench of charred flesh in the biting air. The White Walker glimpsed the decimation of its small patrol, and its icy gaze flicked back to Jon with renewed ferocity. Their blades clashed again. Steel on ice. A high-pitched screech sliced through the cold silence. Jon twisted, pivoted around the walker's thrust, letting the unnatural blade dig a furrow in the snow. The moment's opening was enough. He swung Longclaw in an arc and cleaved the White Walker from shoulder to hip. The walker shattered. In one crystalline instant, it exploded into a million fragments that tinkled down onto the snow like shards of glass. Its death sent a shock through the whites it controlled, causing them all to collapse except one. Jon's group gaped. Only one white remained intact, still writhing in the snow, though its movement seemed disoriented without the guiding force of the walker. This was the perfect chance. The men sprang forward and used chains to bind the creature. It struggled, snapping its jaws and chattering in a guttural screech, but they managed to restrain it without sustaining major injuries. Relief washed through the small band. Their mission was accomplished. They had their proof, a living, or unliving, white to bring back to the 7 kingdoms. Their purpose now was to return south before the entire army of the dead descended upon them. Already the moaning wind felt menacing, and they suspected other White Walkers, or worse, might appear. The Hound's eyes flicked across the horizon, scanning the swirling white for signs of movement. Gendry's breath shuddered in relief. Tormund muttered about how they'd need plenty of ale after this. Jon nodded resolutely, hoisting the chained white forward. But the risk was not over. Even capturing a single undead creature could bring ruin if the rest found them first. They hastened back in the direction from which they had come, footsteps crunching, arms straining with their thrashing captive. The group pressed into the gloom, forging a path toward a safe vantage point where, with luck, they might signal Daenerys for extraction. The hours dragged on under the perpetual gray sky, and no sign of the army's main host emerged. They began to hope that the mission, reckless as it was, might actually succeed without catastrophe. They might actually emerge triumphant, returning to the living realms with the unstoppable truth of what lurked beyond the wall. They came upon a frozen lake ringed by jagged peaks of ice. The surface glimmered beneath a wan sun that painted everything in listless hues of silver and gray. Their boots slid tentatively over the slick surface, testing for cracks. Halfway across, Tormund cursed softly. In the middle of the lake, swirling around them, the wind picked up. The air felt heavier, laced with dread. Jon raised his head, scanning the white horizon. The first whites appeared along the ridges, dozens of them, then hundreds. Their figures lined the edges of the frozen lake like a funeral procession. At their core stood tall, pale forms with eyes like glaciers, White Walkers. A wave of cold dread swept through Jon's party. They realized, to their horror, that they had ventured into a trap. The men scrambled for higher ground, but the army closed in from all sides. Hopelessly outnumbered, they had nowhere to go but the center of the frozen lake, a thin patch of ice ringed by the ravenous dead. Panic flared, but they held it at bay with discipline. They needed to survive, to keep the captured white. Jorah hissed for calm, reminding them that Daenerys might not be far. They just needed to hold out long enough to send a signal. Gendry, the fastest runner, was told to race back toward Eastwatch and call for aid. He relinquished his hammer, took only a small knife to defend himself if needed, and sprinted across the treacherous ice, while the others formed a defensive circle. The whites advanced, drawn by the living warmth and the instinct to kill. The group braced for assault. A thunder of wings shattered the stillness. At first it was only a distant echo carried by the wind, but Jon's heart leapt when he realized the sound was real. From out of the low gray clouds above soared 3 massive shapes, each exhaling plumes of heat and flame that rippled the air. Daenerys had come. Rhaegal, Drogon, and Viserion descended, their roars splitting the sky and rattling the glaciers. The assembled whites snarled in response, their lifeless jaws clacking. But no undead force could stand unaffected by the primal terror of dragons. Relief took hold of Jon. He lifted a hand to wave, though he doubted Daenerys needed any such signal. She had spotted them. The dragons swooped closer, flames bursting from Drogon's maw, igniting scores of whites in seconds. The creatures shrieked as their bodies burst into ashen remains. The dragon's presence was overwhelming, a tide of living fire in an otherwise frozen world. The White Walkers retreated a step, sensing the danger. Daenerys, perched atop Drogon's massive neck, guided the beast to land on a patch of stable ice. She beckoned for Jon and the rest to climb onto the dragon's back, their only hope of escaping the encirclement. Rhaegal and Viserion circled overhead, scorching the dead with precise blasts of dragonfire. Jon urged his companions to move. Tormund pulled the bound wight forward, while the others guarded the retreat. An arrow of ice whistled past them, shot by one of the White Walkers. It struck the ground harmlessly, shattering into frost. Another soared over their heads, missing them by mere inches. Jon's mind flashed with horror at the possibility of the dragons being struck. But he remembered the swirling snow, the precarious distance. The swirling winds might ruin the White Walker's aim. The group clambered onto Drogon's back, hoisting the chained wight with them, the creature snapping and hissing all the while. Daenerys' face was strained but resolute, her silver-gold hair flying in wild tangles around her. "Hold tight," she commanded, her voice carrying over the roar of flames and the screeches of the dead. Drogon's powerful muscles bunched, and he heaved into the sky, massive wings beating against the frigid air. Rhaegal and Viserion soared alongside, continuing to blast the army of the dead. The White Walkers hurled more spears of ice, but the swirling winds disrupted their aim. One spear came dangerously close to Viserion, grazing his flank, leaving a trail of frost that shimmered for a heartbeat. But the blow did not pierce flesh. The dragon roared in pain and anger, letting loose a torrent of flame in retaliation. But by some impossible stroke of luck, none of the dragons fell. Jon felt his heart pound so fiercely he feared it might stop. The weight of relief upon seeing each of Daenerys' children still alive, their wings cleaving the air, was monumental. They had escaped, white in tow, and not a single dragon had perished. The journey back to Eastwatch felt like a fever dream. The cold stung Jon's cheeks, and every jolt of Drogon's flight rattled his bones. Yet beneath that discomfort surged exhilaration. They had survived. Daenerys guided her dragons across the miles of ice and snow, until the Great Wall itself emerged on the horizon. At the Eastwatch fortress, men on the ramparts stared in awe as 3 dragons descended, nearly filling the courtyard with their bulk. Jon and his comrades stumbled off Drogon's back, half frozen but alive. Tormund proudly displayed the snarling wight still bound in chains. Men recoiled from it, some crossing themselves or muttering prayers. Indeed, seeing it up close was a horror and a revelation. The rotting skin, the gaping maw, the unnatural fervor in its attempts to claw at anything living. It was a nightmare made real. Daenerys slid down from Drogon's neck, her cloak flaring behind her. Jon, breath ragged, managed to stand and regard her with grateful, awestruck eyes. "Thank you," he breathed. The words felt too small for what had transpired. Her expression was a tumult of relief and anger. She took in the bruises and gashes on Jon's party, noticing how close to death they had come. "You should not have risked so much," she said softly, though her tone belied her worry. "We needed proof," Jon replied, swallowing hard. "We have it now, thanks to you and your dragons." Her gaze drifted to Viserion. The pale cream and gold dragon bore a shallow streak of pale scar tissue where the ice spear had scraped him. Daenerys passed a hand tenderly over the scaly hide, a silent vow of protection. It was clear to Jon that if Viserion had been lost here, a part of Daenerys would have died with him. As exhausted as she looked, a flicker of grim satisfaction glowed in her eyes. "We will show them," she said, meeting Jon's gaze. "All of them." Jon inclined his head. "Yes," he said. "We will." In the tense hours that followed, Gendry was tended to, having nearly collapsed from exhaustion after his desperate run. The captured wight was confined with heavy chains in a sealed cell, under guard by men who alternated in shifts. A raven was sent to Winterfell, to King's Landing. To every corner that might heed this message, the proof had been secured. Word would spread as swiftly as those black birds could fly. Daenerys, ever the queen in bearing, ordered preparations for a journey south. She intended to present the wight herself before Cersei Lannister, and any other doubters who might gather. Jon was unsure of how that meeting might go, but he could not deny that Daenerys' presence and the living evidence of the undead were the strongest possible persuaders. Perhaps at last, all the living could unite against the threat of the Night King. The alternative was unthinkable, to remain divided while the army of the dead marched inexorably south. But in the back of Jon's mind, a new dread festered. They had seen the White Walkers in broad numbers, and that was only a glimpse. The real enemy loomed beyond the horizon, far greater than a few hundred or even a few thousand. Daenerys had faced them with all 3 dragons intact. Yet if the Night King got another chance to bring one down, he might succeed. And if he did, what monstrous thing might the White Walkers create from a dead dragon? That night, as fierce winds rattled Eastwatch's walls, Jon stood alone on a walkway high above the icy sea. He recalled the raw terror that had seized him when he thought one of those icy spears might strike true. If Daenerys had lost a dragon in that doomed land, she might have turned away from this war, or been consumed by grief and rage in ways no one could predict. The bond between her and her dragons was profound, a reflection of her identity and power. If it was severed, what would become of her? He heard footsteps. Daenerys emerged from the stairwell, arms wrapped in a thick fur cloak. Her face was partially obscured by the hood, but he knew it was her by the soft grace of her movements. "You should rest," Jon said, turning to her with a small nod. She joined him at the edge, gazing out across the moonlit ocean. "I can't," she murmured. "Not yet." He understood. Images from their ordeal beyond the wall played over and over in his mind, too. "You saved us," he said after a moment, speaking quietly. "All of us." She exhaled, the whiteness of her breath drifting in the starlight. "I did what needed to be done. But I keep thinking, how many more times can we risk it? My dragons will not be taken by that creature, that Night King." Jon looked at her, noticing the fire in her eyes. "We won't let it happen," he said. "Not if we can help it." The corner of her mouth curved slightly. Then her gaze rested on him, lingering in the cold air. "I've seen them now, Jon. I've seen the army of the dead. This is truly the war that matters." He nodded, grateful that she understood. "Then we fight it together. You have the North behind you. You have me. Mender ones." She seemed to search his face for a moment, then set her jaw in determination. "And you have me," she said. "And my children." They lingered there in silence, the crash of waves below, the hiss of wind around them. In the glow of the moon, they shared a quiet solidarity for the trials yet to come. Within days, the group set forth, traveling by ship toward White Harbor, then on to King's Landing. Some parted ways along the route. Tormund and a contingent of wildlings remained at Eastwatch to safeguard the wall. Davos traveled with Jon, assisting in diplomatic matters. Daenerys flew overhead with her dragons, escorted by a small retinue. The journey south was a tense one, for the political climate was uncertain. Cersei Lannister held the Iron Throne, and while Daenerys had come to Westeros, intending to take that throne by force if necessary, the undead threat demanded a different approach. Jon and Daenerys had chosen to present the White first, to unify the living. Then, they would decide the matter of the throne, after the long night was averted. Whether Cersei would cooperate was another question entirely. As they neared the capital, some of Daenerys' advisors cautioned her not to bring all 3 dragons into the city. It would incite fear and potential violence. Others argued that it was precisely that fear that might cow Cersei into an alliance. Daenerys weighed these opinions carefully, but ultimately decided to land outside the city walls, with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion perched in the fields, watchful and ready. She refused to disarm herself completely before a woman as cunning and dangerous as Cersei Lannister. A parley was arranged in the Dragon Pit, the ruins of an ancient Targaryen edifice once used to house dragons in days long past. Now it was a crumbling shell of its former grandeur, a fitting stage for a meeting that would decide the fate of kingdoms. Jon, Daenerys, and their retinue arrived first, accompanied by the Hound, who guarded the chest that contained the captured White. Tyrion stood at Daenerys' side, tense and silent, scanning the city that had once been his home. The dragons soared overhead, circling. Their massive shadows passed over the ruins, ensuring everyone remained aware of Daenerys' might. Soon after, Cersei arrived, flanked by Jaime Lannister, Qyburn, and the Queen's Guard. The tension was palpable. The Hound sneered, scanning the Lannisters with undisguised contempt. Jaime's face was carefully controlled, though a flicker of worry shone in his eyes when he heard Drogon's roar from above. Cersei's expression was unreadable behind her practiced mask of regal authority, though her gaze flicked to Daenerys with thinly veiled hatred. Daenerys spoke first, her voice echoing in the ancient amphitheater. She spoke of the army of the dead, the threat beyond the wall, how the living must unite. Jon stood beside her, confirming every claim, his sincerity undeniable. But the words alone were not enough. Cersei smirked, unconvinced, eyes flicking across the crowd as if searching for a lie. That was when the Hound dragged the chest forward, unlatched it, and stepped back. The White lunged out, chained, still filled with malevolent fury for anything living. It scrambled and clawed at the air. Gasps rang out. Some men stumbled backward, hands on their swords. Qyburn, enthralled by the macabre, stepped forward to examine the creature with near fanatical curiosity. Cersei's cold facade flickered. In that single moment, she believed. Her stoic mask cracked just enough to reveal a kernel of fear. "This is what we're facing," Jon said grimly. "We didn't come here to conquer, or to press claims. We came to save the living." Cersei's eyes narrowed. She glanced at Jaime, whose face had grown pale. The tension spiked as the White thrashed against its bonds, teeth snapping. Even the sunlight seemed to dim in that place. At length, Cersei inhaled and said, "If what you say is true, if an army of these things marches on us, we must band together." She let the words hang, then added, "I will order my forces to stand with you. For now." A murmur of relief swept the gathering. But Daenerys and Jon exchanged wary glances, uncertain if they could trust her. Tyrion's expression remained guarded. Still, it was the best outcome they could have hoped for. The parley concluded with an uneasy agreement. Cersei would hold off hostilities, and in exchange, Daenerys and Jon would focus on defeating the undead. What would happen once that threat was vanquished remained uncertain. They left King's Landing with a faint, tenuous hope. Some of Daenerys' advisors were skeptical that Cersei would honor her word. Jaime Lannister too seemed troubled. Though he had spoken no vow, his eyes told a story of conflict. For now, though, a fragile ceasefire existed, granting the living a chance to gather forces, to prepare the North, and to find a way to stop the Night King once and for all. In the weeks that followed, a great movement of armies began, streaming up the King's Road toward Winterfell. Lords who once held grudges set them aside to face the existential threat. Daenerys flew north with her dragons, establishing her presence in the castle that had belonged to House Stark for generations. She and Jon attempted to unify their people. The Northerners looked on Daenerys with a mixture of suspicion and awe. Many revered Jon as king in the north, and not all were pleased to see him bend the knee to Daenerys. Or so they believed. But the presence of 3 dragons circling overhead was a stark reminder that times had changed. Winterfell's courtyard bustled with activity. The combined forces of the unsullied Dothraki, Northern Bannermen, Knights from the Vale, and other loyal houses worked side by side to stockpile provisions. Forges glowed day and night, forging dragonglass weapons from the large cache discovered on Dragonstone. Archers practiced with arrows tipped in dragonglass, while swordsmen tested new blades that shimmered with the obsidian edge. The threat was real, the enemy on the march. Snow began to fall more heavily, as if heralding the arrival of the long night. Daenerys oversaw the fortification of Winterfell's defenses, aided by Jon, Ser Jorah, Tyrion, and the combined knowledge of the Northern Lords. As the snows deepened, Daenerys stabled her dragons in a makeshift enclosure outside the castle walls. They roamed freely to hunt in the skies, sometimes drawing curious onlookers from the gathered armies. One day, she invited Jon to ride Rhaegal with her, as she guided Drogon. The flight was exhilarating, the cold wind whipping at their faces, and it solidified a growing bond between them, something deeper than mutual survival. They soared together above the snow-covered landscape, glimpsing the beauty and harshness of the north, eventually landing near an ice-bound waterfall where steam rose from cracks in the earth. Jon and Daenerys dismounted, hearts still pounding from the adrenaline. There, in the hush of the frozen wilderness, they exchanged words of admiration, of understanding that grew into something like love. But that love was tinged with the unspoken knowledge that winter's chill might swallow them all. Time pressed on. Scouts reported that the Night King's army had passed the wall, aided by some unknown sorcery. Eastwatch had fallen, but Tormund and a band of wildlings managed to escape and spread the warning that the dead were moving south faster than anyone anticipated. The temperature seemed to plunge further each day. The nights were longer, the wind colder, the atmosphere tinged with dread. Jon and Daenerys continued to prepare Winterfell, bracing for an inevitable siege by the army of the dead. They prayed their combined forces, and the dragons, would be enough. When at last the first scouts sighted the undead masses in the distance, no one in Winterfell was surprised. Every man, woman, and child capable of holding a weapon stood ready. Daenerys called down her dragons, who circled overhead, the rumble of their roars echoing across the frozen plains. The front lines of the living armies stretched beyond the castle walls, arranged in defensive positions with trenches to slow the whites. The tension mounted as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. In the hush before battle, every breath came shallow, and every heartbeat pulsed with the knowledge that the moment of truth had arrived. Then they saw it, a dark wave cresting the distant hills, a sea of silent figures marching in unison. In the gloom of dusk, the dead seemed endless. At their head, mounted on an undead horse, rode the Night King himself, flanked by White Walkers. The living forces trembled, for the Night King's aura was palpable even from afar, a chill deeper than winter, an all-consuming void. Yet Daenerys was not alone. Jon stood beside her, unsheathing Longclaw. Bran Stark, from within Winterfell's walls, attempted to use his abilities as the three-eyed raven to glean any weakness in their enemy. Arya Stark, ghost-like in the gloom, prepared to defend her home. Sansa Stark, from the battlements, coordinated the archers and oversaw logistics. This was the great final stand of the living, and none would shirk their duty. A horn shattered the silence. The army of the dead surged forward, whites shrieking in a collective roar that made the blood run cold. Daenerys took to the skies on Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion close behind. Their presence lit a spark of hope among the living ranks. Dragonfire rained down, bright against the darkening sky, immolating thousands of whites at once. The swirling flames cast flickering shadows across the battlefield, revealing the twisted shapes of the undead horde. The first wave was consumed in fire, screeching as they crumbled to ash. But the wave did not stop. More whites climbed over the burnt remains of their fellows, relentless in their advance. The living line held. The unsullied, disciplined, and stoic formed a phalanx of spears. The Dothraki, though ill-suited to winter's chill, roared into the fray, aurochs flashing in arcs of obsidian-laced steel. Northern bannermen loosed arrows tipped with dragonglass, each shot felling one of the monsters. The White Walkers responded with an unearthly calm. Their own weapons of ice claimed the lives of men who ventured too near. The clamor of steel, the roar of dragons, the screams of the dying. Battle raged in a crescendo of terror. Daenerys directed Drogon's flame at concentrations of whites, trying to thin their numbers. Rhaegal soared to flank the White Walkers, unleashing blasts of greenish fire. Viserion followed suit, howling with every exhalation of flame that cut swaths through the undead. The Night King watched from his mount, expressionless, staff of ice in hand. He raised it slowly, as if commanding the swirling storm clouds above. Suddenly, the wind howled with greater ferocity, and a wave of unnatural cold rippled across the field, extinguishing some of the flames on the ground and slowing the dragon's flight. Jon led a sortie of men on the ground, hacking at the Whites' ranks. He fought alongside Tormund and the Hound, the three of them cutting a path through the chaos. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, leapt among the undead, snapping jaws that tore skeletal arms from torsos. Jorah Mormont fought fiercely near Daenerys' vantage, ensuring none of the dead could breach her protective ring if she landed. Every heartbeat was a clash against death itself. Then the Night King hurled a frozen spear toward Rhaegal. Watching from Drogon's back, Daenerys felt her breath catch. But Rhaegal sensed the threat. The green dragon executed a sudden barrel roll, the spear scraping harmlessly across his armored side before spinning into the night sky. Another near miss. The Night King readied another spear, but Drogon banked swiftly, Daenerys leaning into the dragon's flank. She shouted for Viserion to dive, and the pale dragon twisted in the air, evading a second deadly projectile. The living forces collectively released a ragged exhale of relief. The battle stretched on, a brutal seesaw. Bran within Winterfell used his warging abilities to dispatch ravens to circle overhead, tracking the Night King's movements. This intelligence proved invaluable. Tyrion and Sansa organized reinforcements from within the castle, sending fresh fighters to fortify weakened segments of the line. In the thick of it all, Jon pressed toward the Night King, determined to face him. He knew from Hardhome that if they could kill the Night King, the rest of the army of the dead would fall. But the Night King was no fool. Surrounded by White Walkers and Whites, he loomed near the rear, calm in the storm. In a sudden burst of savage cunning, the dead pressed a concentrated assault on the left flank, where the Dothraki had begun to tire. The living line wavered. Daenerys saw the threat from the air and signaled Drogon to unleash an inferno doade. Fire erupted in a semicircle, driving back the undead. But in that moment of vulnerability, the Night King hurled another spear. It soared with preternatural accuracy at Drogon. Daenerys felt an arrow of dread. If Drogon was struck down, the war could be lost in an instant. But Viserion, flying close, roared and swiped the spear aside with a beat of his mighty wings, sending it spiraling off course. The blow clipped Viserion's wingtip, and he snarled in pain. But it was not a fatal strike. He continued to fly, albeit with a slight hitch in his wing beats. Fury ignited Daenerys' features. She guided Drogon toward the Night King, releasing a concentrated column of flame. The blast lit the night, swallowing the Night King in a whirlwind of fire that hissed and crackled. When the flames subsided, the Night King stood unscathed, the swirling cold around him mitigating the dragonfire. He fixed Daenerys with a chilling, triumphant stare. Even from a distance, she could sense his malevolent power. A wave of dread washed over her. Jon, seeing the Night King exposed by the parted ranks of Whites, made his move. He sprinted, sword in hand, hacking through the half-charred undead. The White Walkers advanced to intercept, each brandishing a sword of frosted ice. Jon clashed with the nearest one, parrying desperately. Tormund and the Hound helped keep the Whites from overrunning Jon's position. Somewhere in the chaos, Arya Stark slipped through the shadows, blade of Valyrian steel in her hand. She darted between the Whites, silent and swift. Bran's ravens circled overhead, guiding her instincts. She sought a path to the Night King, the one target that mattered most. The living forces were on the brink of exhaustion. The undead, relentless, did not tire. Even with 3 dragons burning huge swaths of them, the numbers seemed endless. But the dragons had not been lost, had not been turned against their mother. They continued to protect the castle, sowing flames upon the masses. This advantage could still save them all, if they could deliver a killing blow to the Night King in time. Jon broke through the line of Whites, staggering from exhaustion. The Night King stood just a few yards away, the swirl of cold intensifying around him. Jon raised Longclaw and charged, letting out a roar that came from the depths of his being. But before he could strike, the Night King brandished his staff of ice, parrying Jon's blow with supernatural force. Jon stumbled, breath clouding in the frigid air. The Night King advanced, each step resounding with an echo of doom. Jon raised his blade again, desperation fueling his limbs. But the Night King's strength was immense. He swept Jon's sword aside and knocked Jon to the ground, the impact driving the breath from Jon's lungs. Jon rolled to avoid a killing strike, the ice staff slamming into the earth where his head had been moments before. He scrambled upright, teeth chattering in the unnatural cold. The Night King swung again, but Jon blocked with Longclaw, the screech of steel on ice ringing in his ears. Sparks of frost and steel danced between them. Then the Night King thrust forward, an impossibly fast maneuver. Jon braced for impact, but it never came. A lithe figure streaked in from the side, a blade glinting in the faint light. Arya Stark plunged her Valyrian steel dagger into the Night King's side, just beneath his raised arm. His eyes flicked to her, shock and fury warring within their inhuman depths. Jon seized the opportunity, driving Longclaw into the Night King's chest. A sound like cracking glaciers reverberated across the battlefield. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The Night King's entire form shuddered, spiderweb fractures forming along his icy skin. A strange howl escaped him, not quite human, not quite wind. Then he shattered into 1,000 pieces, each shard dissolving in the air. In an instant, every white and white walker collapsed, robbed of the magic that animated them. The unstoppable legion of the dead fell to the ground like discarded husks. Silence replaced the din of battle, broken only by the labored breathing of the survivors. Daenerys, circling overhead, saw the wave of undead simply crumble, and she felt a surge of incredulous relief. The living had prevailed. The army of the dead was vanquished. A collective cheer rose from those still capable of shouting. Bodies littered the plains before winter fell, both living and dead. Fires crackled in the darkness, sending embers rising to join the first faint light of dawn. The dragons landed, smoke rising from their nostrils. Daenerys slid from Drogon's back, stumbling as her legs threatened to give out. She hurried across the battlefield, searching for Jon among the battered survivors. She found him leaning heavily on his sword, Arya by his side, both trembling from cold and shock. Jon looked at Daenerys with a mix of exhaustion, relief, and a faint, disbelieving joy. "It's done," he rasped, voice cracking. "He's gone." Daenerys' eyes shone with tears. She clasped Jon's face in her hands, wordless but overwhelmed with emotion. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. Around them, the survivors began to take stock, to tend to the wounded, to gather the dead. Everyone knew how close they had come to ruin. The aftermath was both solemn and hopeful. The Great War had ended in victory, but at a terrible cost. Countless men and women had perished, brave souls from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Fires were lit to burn the white remains, ensuring no lingering evil could reanimate them. Mass funeral pyres were erected for the fallen, their ashes intermingling in the cold wind. A hush fell over Winterfell, as survivors mourned and celebrated in equal measure. Daenerys walked among her men, offering words of comfort and thanks. She found Grey Worm and the Unsullied bloodied but upright, their discipline unbroken. The Dothraki, fewer in number, still roared with a savage pride at having faced an enemy beyond mortal comprehension. The Northern Lords nodded respectfully as Daenerys passed, the ice beginning to melt in their hearts. They had seen her risk everything, had watched her dragons blaze across the sky to save them. She was no foreign invader, not anymore. She was Daenerys Stormborn, the queen who had fought for the living. Jon reconvened with Sansa, Arya, and Bran in the Great Hall. There, amid flickering torches, they reflected on the battle's toll. Sansa's eyes brimmed with tears at the memory of the carnage, yet her posture remained regal, and her voice steady. Arya stood silent, her expression distant, the rush of the kill wearing off. Bran, calm as ever, confirmed that with the Night King's death, the threat was truly ended. There would be no resurgence of that ancient evil. Their unity had saved them. In the days that followed, a cautious new dawn rose over the north. The war for the Dawn was won. People began to speak of returning south, of rebuilding, of forging a better future. The question of the Iron Throne still loomed. With the existential threat gone, politics would inevitably resurface. But the winter skies were clear, and for the first time in a long while, there was hope. Messengers from the capital arrived, bringing tidings of Cersei's forces. While Cersei had not marched north with her full armies, she had apparently been content to wait and see if the dead would destroy her enemies for her. Word spread that, in truth, she had never intended to help. Jaime Lannister, disgusted by her treachery, had left King's Landing to fight alongside the living, but he had arrived too late to aid in the battle for Winterfell. Still, Cersei remained queen in the south, with the Golden Company bolstering her armies. Now that Daenerys, Jon, and their allies had emerged victorious, the fragile ceasefire was meaningless. War among the living threatened to flare again. Many in the north argued that Daenerys, the rightful Targaryen heir, should fly her dragon south immediately and take what was hers by fire and blood. Others, including Jon, advised caution. Winter was still upon them, and the realm was battered, exhausted from the war. Tyrion counseled negotiation, hoping that the unity forged in defeating the Night King might inspire a more peaceful approach. But Daenerys knew Cersei. She doubted that the Lannister queen would surrender or bargain in good faith, especially with 3 dragons still alive to challenge her. Word also reached them of pockets of southern lords who, upon hearing of the victory over the dead, had pledged loyalty to Daenerys. The realm was changing, the people yearning for the one who had saved them from the long night. Yet as thousands of new swords declared for Daenerys, she felt the weight of power settle on her shoulders. The choices ahead would define the fate of the 7 kingdoms. One crisp morning, Jon and Daenerys strolled through the courtyard of Winterfell, still piled with snow, though the first hints of spring sunlight glimmered on the horizon. She wore a thick white coat, and he was clad in black and gray furs. Ghost trotted beside Jon, occasionally nosing Daenerys' hand for a scratch behind the ears. The keep was quieter now, the armies resting or preparing to move. Smoke rose from distant pyres, where the last of the dead were being burned. "The realm is ours to shape," Daenerys said softly, her tone pensive. Jon nodded, glancing at her. "It is, but we must be careful. The people have seen enough war." Her gaze flicked to the stables where Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion lay curled together, occasionally stirring. Their forms were majestic, even in repose, and she felt her heart warm at the sight of them alive and well. "I will not become like my father," she said. "I will not force the realm to bend in fear. We fought together to protect the living, but now we have to govern, to bring peace." Jon placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You've already shown mercy and wisdom," he said. "You've earned the trust of the North, though it will take time for them to truly accept someone new. But you have my word, as their king in the North once and always. I stand behind you. We stand behind you. Then shall." She bowed her head, a small, grateful smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she breathed. "But the Iron Throne is still claimed by Cersei. I cannot leave that unanswered forever." "No," Jon admitted. "But we can approach it with the same resolve we brought to the army of the dead." Cersei is cunning, and she'll see our victory as a threat. We should try to avoid more bloodshed if we can. Daenerys studied his face, seeing the man she had grown to trust and care for. "If she refuses to yield?" she asked, her voice quieter. Jon's jaw tightened. "Then we do what must be done." In the weeks that followed, Daenerys summoned her lords and allies to strategize. They agreed that the first step was to consolidate the newly pledged houses, to ensure stability throughout the realm. Jon wrote letters to the lords of the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands, urging them to send representatives to an assembly at Harrenhal, a neutral location large enough to host many banners. There, Daenerys would demonstrate her intent to rule justly and fairly, offering pardons to those who had fought for the Lannisters if they would swear loyalty. The goal was to isolate Cersei, to turn the tide of support away from the Iron Throne. The plan was bold. Tyrion and Varys worked tirelessly, dispatching ravens and negotiating with local lords. Many were still reeling from the near cataclysm of the long night, so the Targaryen promise of a better future carried weight. Jaime Lannister sent word that he and Brienne of Tarth had gathered enough men willing to abandon Cersei's cause. They would travel north to Harrenhal. Meanwhile, Cersei clung to power in the Red Keep, presumably plotting a countermove. Still, the heart of Daenerys' power remained the dragons. So long as Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion lived, no fortress could stand against her for long. But she refused to become a conqueror who burned cities and innocents. The memory of the Great War was too fresh. She would not be the queen of scorched earth. Yet she knew that if it came to open conflict, she must wield her advantage swiftly and decisively, lest Cersei bring ruin to the realm yet again. At Harrenhal's sprawling castle, which loomed in majestic ruins along the God's Eye Lake, Daenerys gathered with her council. The vaulted halls echoed with the footsteps of arriving lords. Ghostly winds whistled through the half-collapsed towers, reminding everyone of the fortress's dark history. A massive courtyard served as a meeting ground, with rows of hastily erected tents for the visitors. It was there that Daenerys held court, seated on a makeshift throne, flanked by her dragons in a wide field beyond. The presence of those beasts was a silent reminder that no one here need test her patience. One by one, banners arrived. Houses from the Reach that had once been loyal to the Tyrells, houses from the Stormlands uncertain of their allegiances, since the Baratheon line dwindled, houses from the Crownlands, whose loyalty to the Lannisters had wavered after they saw the outcome of the war with the dead. From the north came representatives bearing the direwolf sigil, confirming that Jon Snow supported his queen. The Vale Lords, under the watchful eye of Lord Robin Arryn and Sansa Stark's urging, appeared as well. Even some Ironborn warriors, led by Yara Greyjoy, joined the assembly, proud to have thrown off Euron's yoke. Every arrival was another step toward unifying the realm under Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys spoke, her voice carrying across the courtyard. She did not demand subservience. Instead, she reminded them that they had all just survived the greatest threat in living memory by standing together. She recounted her liberation of slaves in Essos, her desire to break the wheel of tyranny, her willingness to forge a fair and peaceful rule. Yes, she had dragons, and she could force them to bend the knee. But she wished to rule by consent and loyalty, not fear and ashes. The lords listened, many uncertain. Yet Jon Snow, standing at her side, gave a speech of his own. He spoke of Daenerys' selflessness, how she saved his life and the lives of countless Northerners by riding into the heart of the frozen dead, risking her dragons. He spoke of how she had proven herself over and over, not out of a lust for power, but because she believed in duty and sacrifice. Sansa Stark, too, lent her voice, acknowledging Daenerys' bravery and the transformation of old feuds into alliances when the dead threatened them all. Tyrion offered well-chosen words, appealing to the Lord's sense of pragmatism. The tide began to shift, the fear of dragons softened by gratitude and hope. Over the next weeks at Harrenhal, pledges of loyalty came in gradually, day by day. Daenerys accepted them graciously, offering each lord an opportunity to discuss reforms, local governance, and grievances. She committed to listening, something few rulers in recent memory had done. Tensions simmered, but no open hostilities erupted. Jaime Lannister arrived and knelt before Daenerys, pledging the sword of House Lannister now that his sister's treachery was laid bare. He had faced exile from King's Landing to follow his conscience, and that sacrifice earned some measure of forgiveness from Daenerys, though the ghost of her father's murder remained in the background. Brienne of Tarth stood by Jaime's side, giving him silent support. The old grudges and alliances shifted like tectonic plates, forging a new landscape of power. Eventually, Cersei stood alone in the Red Keep. Her armies were outnumbered. Her allies abandoned or defected. The Golden Company, on her payroll, remained loyal only as long as her coin lasted. As winter's chill began to recede, news reached Harrenhal that Euron Greyjoy's fleet had been crippled by Yara's decisive raids. Supplies from the east were no longer reaching King's Landing. Starvation loomed for the civilians under Cersei's rule. Tyrion and Daenerys pressed for a negotiation, hoping to avoid a bloody siege of the capital. With her options dwindling, Cersei eventually agreed to receive envoys. But Daenerys, wary of treachery, chose to travel to King's Landing with all 3 dragons, her armies following by land. The approach of that force was enough to quell any thoughts of open rebellion. King's Landing shuddered at the sight of 3 winged silhouettes overhead, and the city gates opened. Daenerys entered the capital without a single dropped spear, accompanied by Jon, Tyrion, Arya, and Grey Worm leading a column of Unsullied. The tension in the streets was palpable, but the people stood in weary silence, eyes wide as the dragons loomed overhead. In the Red Keep's throne room, Cersei Lannister still wore the crown, perched on the Iron Throne with a defiant tilt to her chin. Behind her, the shrinking cadre of Queensguard hovered uneasily. The Mountain stood at her side, a looming figure in black armor. Yet the difference in power was stark. Daenerys strode forward with regal confidence, flanked by Jon and Tyrion, with Grey Worm's unsullied ranks behind them. An entire city stood at her back as well, curious, frightened, but ready to see the change of power. Cersei's gaze flicked to Jon Snow, and a bitter sneer tugged her lips. "You bent the knee to her. Now you bring this Targaryen conqueror to my gates." She spat. "After all we've done to protect the realm." Daenerys' tone was measured. "The realm you tried to betray by refusing to assist in the war against the dead? The realm you withheld aid from, hoping the dead would destroy us and spare you? The realm you would starve beneath your own pride?" Cersei bristled, her posture rigid. "I did what I must to secure the future for House Lannister." "Your house stands alone," Tyrion interjected softly, stepping forward. His voice carried sadness. "Your people have suffered enough, Cersei." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant flapping of dragon wings outside. Cersei looked at Tyrion, as though she might strike him. Then she glanced at Jon, who bore the stoic composure of a man who had faced death and worse. At Daenerys, radiant with draconic power. Her composure fractured just enough to reveal the helpless anger beneath. She saw the writing on the wall. The game was lost. Clenching her jaw, Cersei rose from the Iron Throne, the metal scraping under her. She stood tall, black dress shimmering with gold trim. For a moment, it seemed she might hurl some last insult or attempt a desperate act of violence. The Mountain stirred at her side. But Daenerys' eyes flicked to him, and a presence as fierce as dragonfire seemed to radiate from her. The air itself felt charged. Finally, Cersei exhaled a shaky breath. "You want the throne?" she said quietly, stepping down. "Take it." She slipped the crown from her head and placed it on the seat of the Iron Throne. Jaime, who had arrived behind Daenerys' entourage, watched with a mix of relief and sorrow. Cersei's face twisted into something beyond anger, betrayed, abandoned, humiliated. And yet, there was almost a strange relief flickering beneath her fury, as though she had grown tired of the endless struggle. The tension snapped. Cersei's guards lowered their arms, some dropping to their knees. Grey Worm and the Unsullied pressed forward to secure the throne room. Daenerys stepped up the dais and stared down at the crown. She hesitated, a kaleidoscope of emotion passing across her features. Ambition, fear, duty, hope. At length, she picked up the crown. The metal felt cold against her fingers. She turned to face the gathered courtiers, lords, and soldiers. Jon's steady gaze encouraged her, as did Tyrion's small nod. Then she placed the crown upon her head. "I, Daenerys of the House Targaryen, first of my name, breaker of chains, mother of dragons." She said, voice steady but trembling with suppressed emotion, "do hereby claim the Iron Throne with the consent of the realm, to lead and protect all." A new hush blanketed the throne room. Then, slowly, those assembled knelt. Even Jaime, out of respect for what was right. The Mountain and Cersei's other guards hesitated, but they too bent the knee under the stern gazes of the Unsullied. Outside, the city stirred. Word spread that Cersei had surrendered, that the war was over, that a new queen, one who had saved them from the dead, now ruled. Whispers of relief and hope traveled through the streets, mingled with skepticism. The dragon's roars echoed above, heralding a new age. In the days that followed, Cersei was confined to chambers under guard, pending a formal judgment. Some advised Daenerys to execute her for past crimes. Others, including Tyrion, suggested exile to a distant land. Jon advocated mercy, though he made no excuses for her treachery. In the end, Daenerys decided that Cersei would be spared death, and would instead be exiled across the narrow sea, with enough provisions to keep her from returning. It was a controversial choice, but Daenerys wished to break the cycle of brutality. The realm needed an example of justice tempered by mercy, not more vengeance. And so it was that Cersei Lannister departed Westeros under guard. Jaime, torn between his past and his sense of honor, chose to remain, offering his sword to the new queen. Bronn, typically out for his own gain, had already aligned with Tyrion, hoping the new regime might be more lucrative. The Seven Kingdoms, at last united under a single monarch, stood at the threshold of a new era. Daenerys Targaryen ruled from the Iron Throne, her 3 dragons patrolling the skies, symbols of peace and power. Jon Snow was named Warden of the North, as well as her chief advisor in matters of strategy and governance, though the bond between them was deeper than titles. Sansa Stark oversaw Winterfell, ensuring the North's loyalty, while Arya traveled, free-spirited, across the land, though she remained ever watchful for threats to her family. Tyrion served as Hand of the Queen, employing his wit and cunning for reforms that aimed to rebuild a shattered kingdom. Varys coordinated intelligence, rooting out conspiracies before they could bloom into rebellions. Grey Worm led the Unsullied with a firm but just hand, gradually settling them across parts of Westeros where they could find homes and families if they wished. The scars of war and the long night ran deep. It would take years for the fields to recover, for the cities to repair their walls, for the hearts of the people to learn to trust again. Yet there was a sense of promise in the air. The endless winter had begun to recede. Spring teased its arrival with gentler breezes. Fields of snow gave way to muddy plains, and farmers ventured out with seeds of hope. Trade routes reopened, linking the far-flung corners of the realm. One by one, the wounds of the past were tended to. Slower than any single monarch's decree, but surer, as a generation that had survived the worst came together to rebuild. In King's Landing, Daenerys walked among the common folk without a retinue of gold-cloaked guards, listening to their complaints and concerns. She issued decrees aimed at reducing corruption in the royal court, establishing fair taxes, and offering relief for those hardest hit by the wars. The old aristocracy grumbled, unused to a ruler who cared for the people rather than simply extracting wealth. But the commoners found reason to celebrate, hailing her as a deliverer, not just from winter, but from tyranny. The dragons, too, adapted to peacetime. Drogon remained the most closely bonded to Daenerys, often perched on the parapets of the Red Keep, casting an enormous shadow over the courtyard. Rhaegal and Viserion roamed more freely, sometimes venturing as far as the Westerlands or the Stormlands, returning to Daenerys with fish from the seas or livestock from fields. The farmers were compensated, ensuring harmony between dragon and mortal. Over time, the realm grew accustomed to the sight of dragons overhead, their presence becoming a living reminder that Westeros had stepped into a new chapter of its history. Jon and Daenerys, their relationship tempered by the fires of war and the ice of the long night, found solace in each other. Some whispered about their lineage, speculating on rumors that Jon might be a Targaryen as well. But those whispers never found confirmation. Bran, the knower of secrets, kept silent on certain matters, believing that the realm needed the stability of Daenerys' uncontested rule. If Jon's parentage were revealed, it might spark new conflicts over succession. Jon himself seemed content to let Daenerys be the queen, focusing on the duties he found most meaningful, protecting the North, guiding the realm's armies, and ensuring that the nightmares of the past did not return. Some nights, when the city was quiet and the stars glittered over the Blackwater Bay, Daenerys and Jon would mount Drogon or Rhaegal and fly beyond the city walls, sharing a moment of solitude high above the ground. In those rare times of peace, they remembered the horrors they had faced and marveled at the resilience of life. They had almost lost it all beyond the wall. Had Viserion perished that day, had the Night King claimed a dragon of his own, the entire realm might have been doomed. Instead, by a narrow margin of fate, they had kept all 3 dragons safe, and with them, the hope of humanity. Seasons turned. The harsh bite of winter loosened its grip on the land. Green shoots pushed through the melting snow, and the small folk tended new crops. Roads once rendered impassable by ice were restored. Trade caravans came from Dorne and beyond, bringing spices, silks, and exotic goods. The ravaged areas of the Riverlands and the North slowly rebuilt, aided by royal charters that encouraged cooperation and fair trade. The wheel, that ancient symbol of cyclical suffering, began to crack. Perhaps not fully broken, but fractured enough that the realm might have a chance to grow beyond the old ways of endless war. In time, even the memory of the army of the dead grew distant, relegated to stories and songs. Bards sang of the brave men and women who held the line at Winterfell, who slew the Night King, who saved the realm from an eternal night. They sang of Jon Snow, the king in the north, who fought with a blade of Valyrian steel. They sang of Arya Stark, the deadly blade of winter's revenge. They sang of Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, who soared through the cold night to rescue them, and never lost a single child to the darkness. The songs carried an echo of truth and wonder, though the living who remembered that war would never forget the terror in those frozen eyes. On the anniversary of the victory over the Night King, Daenerys held a grand gathering in King's Landing. Lords, knights, and commoners alike were invited to celebrate the living, to remember the fallen, and to reaffirm their unity. The dragons circled overhead in a magnificent display, roaring in the warm spring air. Lanterns were lit and released into the sky at dusk, filling the heavens with small floating lights, a tribute to those who had been lost. Jon stood by Daenerys' side, hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the crowd. He saw children laughing, unafraid of the night, and knew that they had carved out a future free from the terror of the dead. When the lanterns had faded into the distance, Daenerys rose to speak before the gathered throng, her voice carrying with a regal authority tempered by genuine empathy. She thanked every soul who had contributed to the realm's revival. Soldiers, farmers, builders, healers. She promised continued efforts to bring justice, prosperity, and peace to all corners of the kingdom. The applause was thunderous, resonating through the city. The dragons, sensing the unity in that moment, bellowed in harmony, their roars echoing off the walls of the Red Keep. In the quiet that followed, Daenerys found Jon on a balcony overlooking the sea. The moon shone on the waters, turning them silver. She moved close, slipping her arm through his. He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. They stood there in companionable silence, letting the sounds of distant celebration swirl around them. Below, they could see the lights from ships in the bay, the flicker of torches in the streets, the hush of a city at peace. "We've come a long way," she said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. He nodded. "We have. Didn't think it possible sometimes." Her gaze drifted to the starry sky. "I still remember the fear I felt beyond the wall, seeing the Night King raise his spear. We almost lost so much. I almost lost everything." Jon squeezed her hand gently. "You didn't. And because of that, the realm can see a new day." She turned toward him, her silver hair catching the moonlight. "We built this future together," she whispered. "And we'll keep building it, so long as the people believe in it." He leaned in and kissed her softly, a gesture of comfort and promise. They parted, eyes glimmering with unshed tears of relief and contentment. In that moment, high above a kingdom no longer haunted by eternal night, they stood not just as rulers or warriors, but as two souls who had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger. Below them, the city basked in the glow of celebration and new beginnings, and overhead, 3 dragons soared freely, guardians of the dawn they had all fought so hard to secure. The future was not certain. Such things never are. There would be challenges, discontent, and the slow unraveling of old power structures. Yet the realm had a chance to heal and flourish, led by a queen who understood the cost of power and a king who had died once already for the sake of the living. Together, they had proven that the darkest forces could be driven back, that dragons need not be weapons of terror, and that unity could triumph over despair. And so it was that Westeros entered an age of rebuilding, lit by the steady flame of hope, forever changed by what had been narrowly won against the frozen tide of death beyond the wall. They had called it the Festival of the New Dawn, a rare convergence of noble lords, small folk, and foreign envoys, all gathered to celebrate both the victory over the Night King and the first anniversary of Daenerys Targaryen's ascension to the Iron Throne. King's Landing had never seen such a gathering in living memory. Tapestries of crimson and gold hung from the walls. Targaryen and Stark banners fluttered side by side, and the streets were awash in the bright colors of visiting dignitaries. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that Westeros at last was taking a collective breath after years of war, rebellion, and the unfathomable threat that had marched down from the land of everlasting ice. Yet for all the festivities, Daenerys felt a tremor of unease. Every time her eyes drifted skyward and caught sight of a flicker of scaled wings, regal gliding lazily above the Red Keep, Viserion and Drogon off in the distance, she remembered the close calls that could have cost her those children. The memory of the Night King's spears cutting through the whirling snow, of the undead ranks nearly overwhelming her allies, still lingered in her thoughts. Had the fates spun differently, even by the narrowest thread, she might have lost a dragon that day beyond the wall. The notion still churned her stomach. That she had kept all three was a miracle that reshaped the fate of Westeros. And now, every time she looked at them, the wonder of their survival swelled in her heart. She watched from a high balcony as the city bustled with cheer. Musicians and acrobats wandered the squares, and tables laden with bread and roasted meat were set for the hungry. The Queen's gold-cloaked guards managed the throngs of people, ensuring no one was trampled. High in the pale sky, the sun shone brightly over King's Landing, as though the gods themselves had decided to cast aside the shadows of the past. Occasionally, a roar from Drogon echoed in the distance, causing children to squeal with either delight or fear. Over the last year, many had grown accustomed to the presence of dragons overhead, though an undercurrent of awe and caution remained as constant as the tides. Jon Snow joined Daenerys on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of mead. His hair was cropped slightly shorter than it had been during the war, though it still bore the unruly curls of the north. He wore black and gray leathers, trimmed in silver, practical yet dignified. Around the courtyard below, nobles from Dorne stood chatting with northern lords, and the swirl of their bright, contrasting clothing was a quiet testament to how much the realm had changed. "Here," Jon said, offering her a cup. "It's from the Reach. Sweet, but not too strong." Daenerys smiled her thanks, sipped, and savored the mellow sweetness that chased away the dryness in her throat. She glanced at Jon's face, handsome in a quiet way, made more so by the lines of responsibility and the ghosts of sacrifice. In the year since their final victory over the dead, he had become something akin to the realm's moral compass. Even the small folk, who once knew little of him except rumor, had come to respect that he was not merely a figurehead from the north, but a man who had died for his people and fought for their salvation. "You look thoughtful," Jon remarked, leaning against the stone balustrade. His dark gray eyes were on her, watchful. Daenerys exhaled slowly. "I was thinking about the day we brought our white to King's Landing. All the fear in that dragon pit, and Cersei's disbelief. Or perhaps her refusal to believe. I keep wondering how close we came to losing everything." She managed a small, wry grin. "I know we're supposed to be celebrating, but old worries die hard." He set his cup down and gently took her hand. His warmth steadied her. "We did nearly lose everything," he said, voice low. "But we didn't. You were there. The dragons were there. We fought. We survived. That's why we have reason to celebrate today." She nodded, letting the hush of his words soothe her disquiet. Far below, she could see Tyrion Lannister maneuvering through the crowd, dressed in fine black silks. He was likely on his way to the Great Hall, where dignitaries would soon gather to pay homage and deliver gifts in honor of the festival. Daenerys noticed how deftly Tyrion paused to greet a minor lord from the Westerlands, a gentle word here, a polite bow there. Being Hand of the Queen suited him. His cunning worked in tandem with her sense of justice, and his strategic mind had been instrumental in unifying the fractured realm. Daenerys let Jon's hand go, finishing the last of her mead. "Time to greet our guests," she murmured. "We are the gracious hosts, after all." He inclined his head in agreement, though he seemed reluctant to let go of the fleeting moment of quiet between them. Side by side they descended the stone steps and made their way into the corridors of the Red Keep. Servants bustled past, carrying flowers, trays of fruit, and barrels of ale. The excitement in the air felt genuine. For the first time in years, the realm was not braced for immediate catastrophe, though plenty of work remained to rebuild villages, roads, and alliances. Still, this day at least, belonged to joy. They reached the Great Hall, which had been redecorated for the celebration. Gone were the Lannister lions that once draped the pillars. The three-headed dragon of House Targaryen was proudly displayed in the form of new banners. Long wooden tables were arranged on either side of a central aisle, leaving space for those wishing to stand. Soldiers from the Unsullied stood watch, their discipline etched into every line of their postures. Many lords and ladies had taken their seats, speaking in hushed voices or gazing around at the hall's transformation. Daenerys swept forward, every inch a queen, though her manner was less distant than that of many past monarchs. She offered smiles, nods, small phrases of thanks as she passed. Jon walked with her, receiving polite inclinations of the head from northerners who had grown to trust him. They approached the dais, and Daenerys settled onto the Iron Throne. Even after a year, sitting there sometimes felt strange. She had come to Westeros to conquer, but ended up forging alliances out of necessity and empathy. Jon took a seat on a smaller chair at her right, while Tyrion and the rest of the Queen's Council gathered around. Tyrion began to speak, welcoming the assembled guests. He introduced envoys from the Summer Islands, representing a distant land of warmth and trade, who brought lavish gifts of rare spices and intricately carved tusks. Daenerys accepted them with formal gratitude. Next came a contingent from Braavos, a representative of the Iron Bank, who acknowledged the new stability in Westeros and expressed interest in extending favorable loans to rebuild infrastructure. Daenerys thanked him graciously, mindful that the Iron Bank's goodwill could be a double-edged sword. Still, it was a step toward a stable future. One by one, dignitaries approached. Lord Royce of the Vale pledged new coin to repair roads ravaged by the snows of the north. The new lady of House Glover, a fierce woman named Mayera, promised more ships built in the White Harbor docks for patrolling trade routes. A few traveling mummers performed a short comedic sketch praising the three good dragons who saved the realm. The hall erupted in applause, laughter rumbling in the high rafters. Even Daenerys joined in with a soft chuckle, though tears pricked her eyes at the mention of the dragons, her children, her living flame. When the formal presentations were at an end, food and wine began to circulate more freely. A hush of expectation fell over the hall, for it was known that Queen Daenerys Targaryen would deliver a few words on this auspicious day. She stood, and the clink of cups, the rustle of silks, all quieted in deference. "My lords and ladies," she began, her voice carrying with a regal lilt. "Friends from beyond Westeros, allies from the north, from the Vale, the Reach, and beyond. We gather here as a free people, having cast off the threat of the long night that once sought to end all life in this realm. Each of you took part in saving what we hold dear, whether by standing on the battlefield or by providing refuge and supplies. Today's festival is not merely mine. It belongs to all of us." And now, the crowd stirred, nods and murmurs of agreement rippling through them. Jon watched her, pride illuminating his features. She continued, "We have endured tragedy, heartbreak, and betrayal in the past. We have seen the horror that marched upon our walls. But from those ashes, we have built new bonds. Between houses once divided, between peoples once sundered by old grudges. The dragons overhead serve as guardians and symbols of this new beginning. We will write a new history, free from the endless wheel of bloodshed. Wow. A smattering of applause broke out, but it was not the raucous ovation that might greet some tyrant who demanded flattery. It was genuine, warm, a rising tide of relief and optimism. Daenerys felt a small, fluttering sense of both hope and responsibility in her chest. She finished quietly. Let this festival of the new dawn remind us that so long as we stand together, no darkness can extinguish our light. Enjoy the day, and know my gratitude is yours. With that, she inclined her head, and the applause swelled. Smiling, she returned to her seat, and the festivities resumed in earnest. Servants brought out lavish platters, honey-glazed hams, bowls of lemon cakes, roast duck with spiced oranges, filling the air with a heady aroma. Musicians began a lively tune, and the great hall buzzed with conversation. Daenerys watched it all unfold, with a sense of wonder. So many different banners, so many lords and ladies who had once been enemies, now laughing at the same jokes, passing pitchers of Dornish red wine. Of course, old hurts did not vanish overnight, but this sense of shared relief was a promising start. Partway through the feast, Arya Stark appeared near the dais with her usual stealth. She wore a simple tunic and breeches beneath a leather vest emblazoned with the Stark direwolf, her hair braided back. Daenerys and Jon both noticed her at once, a flash of amusement passing between them at how she managed to slip through a crowded hall without drawing attention. "Your Grace," Arya said with a slight smirk, "can I steal Jon for a moment?" Jon rose, somewhat relieved to escape the press of courtiers. Daenerys nodded, giving them both leave. As Jon followed Arya toward the side of the hall, he saw Sansa as well, standing by a tall window. She wore a gown of deep gray, the Stark wolf intricately stitched in silver thread across the bodice, and her red hair gleamed under the torchlight. Arya and Sansa were not alone. Bran was there too, seated in his wheeled chair, the faintest of smiles on his inscrutable face. It felt as though a quiet piece of the North had claimed this corner of the hall. Jon reached them, heart lifting at the sight of his siblings. A year had passed since their victory, but each of them had gone on separate paths. Arya often journeyed throughout the kingdom, sometimes vanishing for weeks to scout out unrest, or simply to wander. Sansa split her time between King's Landing and Winterfell, and Bran's duties as the three-eyed raven remained a mystery to most. Yet there was a comfort in being together. The four who had begun this saga in Winterfell's courtyard so many years ago. Congratulations on surviving the pomp? Sansa teased, her voice wry, but her eyes warm. You look suitably regal up there alongside Daenerys. Jon shrugged. I prefer fewer people and less noise. But it's good for morale, and the realm seems genuine in its celebration. He glanced at Arya. You said you needed me? Arya shrugged lightly. Just wanted to give you a gift is all. She pulled out a small wooden box from the bag slung at her hip. Happy festival of the new dawn, Jon. Her face gave away nothing more. Arya's occasional gifts were often surprising in nature, sometimes functional, sometimes dangerously sharp. Sansa rolled her eyes. You can't wait until later? But Arya shook her head. No, I want to see him open it now. Jon hesitated, curiosity piqued. He lifted the box's lid. Inside lay a dagger. Small and elegantly forged, the handle wrapped in black leather etched with a Stark direwolf. The blade was Valyrian steel, dark, and rippling with the telltale patterns in the metal, its edge cunningly shaped to a perfect point. A hiss of admiration escaped Sansa before she could catch herself. It's beautiful, Jon said, running a thumb over the handle. The weight felt perfect, light enough for swift movement, balanced enough for lethal thrusts. Thank you, Arya. She allowed herself a brief grin. You deserve more than just a blade, but I thought, well, it's good to have something small, easy to conceal. For those times you don't want to be carrying Longclaw. He nodded, deeply touched. This was a piece of home, a piece of their shared life. The lines of the wolf's face were carved in a way that reminded him of their father's stern but kind visage. He swallowed. I appreciate it. I'll keep it close. No. Bran's voice, soft as a whisper, drifted in. Valyrian steel has a magic of its own, he observed, his distant gaze seeming to peer into invisible realms. It saved us once. Let's hope we never need it that way again. They all grew momentarily silent, recalling the horrors of the undead. Then Sansa changed the subject. I've been meeting with lords from the Riverlands, trying to coordinate shipments of grain north in exchange for northern timber. Winterfell's supplies are stretched thin with new settlers. Many small folk have migrated north, because farmland in the south was ravaged by earlier wars. The Riverlands also need help. We're discussing a mutual benefit. John nodded. Daenerys will support the arrangement. She's been approving trade deals like that since she took the throne. Anything that helps rebuild. He paused, glancing around to be sure no curious courtiers were eavesdropping. How did the northern lords feel, truly, about her rule? They seemed grateful that she stood by them when the dead came. Sansa answered. Some are still cautious, but that's the North's nature. But she's done nothing to alienate them, and her respect for our autonomy, for the traditions of the North, has helped. Besides, it doesn't hurt that you remain their beloved king in the North in all but title. They'll follow your lead? Arya crossed her arms, scanning the crowd in the great hall. They know we'd all stand against her if she turned into some crazed tyrant, she said bluntly. But she hasn't. If anything, she's shown them more kindness and justice than they ever expected. So unless something changes drastically, the northern lords will keep the peace. Jon relaxed slightly, nodding. He turned to Bran. And how about you? Any visions? Warnings we should heed? Bran's expression flickered, as though 1,000 images passed behind his eyes in a single breath. No new nightmares, he said at last. I've been looking, though. Some small ripples may come from beyond the narrow sea, from old Essos. But nothing like the army of the dead. He paused, glancing at each sibling in turn. We've lived through the worst. That doesn't mean the realm will know only peace, but the threat of utter extinction is gone. We have time now. That's a gift. Shh. A hush fell among them. Jon closed the small wooden box over the dagger and tucked it into the leather satchel at his waist. Thank you. He repeated to Arya, then gave Sansa and Bran a grateful look. I'm relieved you're all here for this festival. As you said, time is a gift. We should enjoy it. Arya smiled, though her eyes gleamed with the restless spirit that always beckoned her on new journeys. We'll enjoy it for now. Then perhaps I'll ride off somewhere else. The world is large. I want to see it, especially now that we're not on the brink of annihilation. No. Sansa and Jon exchanged a look of mingled fondness and exasperation. They knew better than to try to tether Arya to any one place. Her heart was too wild for that. Still. Sansa laid a gentle hand on Arya's shoulder. You've earned your freedom. We all have. They lingered a few minutes more before merging back into the flow of courtiers. Jon returned to Daenerys' side, greeting a few delegates who wished to present him with ceremonial tokens of gratitude for the North's role in saving the realm. As the day wore on, the great hall turned lively with dancing, music, and half-drunken toasts. Daenerys made her rounds, listening to the concerns of lesser lords and to the optimistic chatter of tradesmen. She received word that Yara Greyjoy, still ruling the Iron Islands, had sent a symbolic chest of salt and iron, a gesture reaffirming her loyalty. The alliance with the Iron Islands was fragile, but it had held since Euron's defeat. At one point, late in the afternoon, Daenerys felt the press of the hall growing stifling. Excusing herself with a polite nod to those gathered, she slipped out into the courtyard for a breath of fresh air. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the training yard, Unsullied drilled quietly, spears whirling in perfect unison. She admired their discipline. At the far end of the yard, she spotted Sir Jorah Mormont instructing a small group of new recruits. Despite the man's graying hair at the temples, he moved with grace, barking corrections in a firm but fair voice. Beside him was Grey Worm, his head bowed in concentration. Daenerys paused, watching for a moment. Jorah had once followed her across the narrow sea, exiled from Westeros, ridden with a disease he feared incurable. Yet he had returned, loyal to the bitter end, and she had risked everything to find a cure for his affliction. Now here he stood, thriving, passing on his knowledge. He felt her presence and turned, bowing at once. Grey Worm followed suit. She stepped forward, dismissing formality with a gentle raise of her hand. "My queen," Jorah said, face lighting with understated warmth. "It's good to see you here. We were just finishing up." "Don't let me interrupt," she replied. "I only needed some air." Grey Worm nodded, dismissing the recruits for a brief respite. Their footsteps scuffed away across the yard, and Daenerys glanced around, noticing how the once cracked flagstones had been repaired. Even the walls looked sturdier after a year of reconstruction. Hard to believe that not long ago, the capital had braced for an invasion by Whites and White Walkers if the wall had not held. Every improvement felt like a testament to the realm's resilience. "How fares the Unsullied?" Daenerys asked. Grey Worm inclined his head. "Well, Your Grace, many have begun to settle among the people. Some remain near King's Landing, others have traveled north or south to keep roads safe. We still train daily. Discipline must be maintained." She offered a small smile. "I'm glad. We owe the Unsullied our peace." Jorah spoke, his voice gently respectful. "And what of the Dothraki? Are they faring as well, living among Westerosi cities?" Daenerys pursed her lips. The Dothraki were a thornier question. Though many had died in the Great War, a sizable Khalasar still followed her, living in a large encampment outside the city walls. Some had begun to adapt, exchanging raids for trade, forging bonds with local farmers who found them to be surprisingly eager horse breeders and skilled hunters. But cultural friction remained. "They're trying," she said at last. "Many prefer the wide-open fields, so they remain on the outskirts. But a few have found work in the city as riders for the city watch, or as couriers. It's a new world for them. We have to be patient." "Namdani." Jorah nodded, acceptance flickering in his eyes. "They follow you, always. If you command them to remain peaceful, they will. Though I wonder if, in time, they might wish to return to Essos, to their homeland." "Perhaps," Daenerys conceded. "I'll not force them to stay if they wish to leave. But for now, they seem content enough under my banner. And many are curious about these fertile lands, so unlike the Dothraki sea." She paused, considering the swirl of complexities in integrating the Dothraki into Westeros. "If they remain here, we must ensure they can become part of this kingdom without losing who they are." Grey Worm and Jorah both inclined their heads in agreement. Daenerys felt a soft warmth in her chest. Once, she had imagined conquering Westeros by direct force. Now she was learning that bringing cultures together required more nuance, more compromise. The clang of steel in the yard drew her gaze to the recruits resuming their drills. Another year. Another decade. Perhaps a generation. Eventually, these alliances would set the shape of the realm for centuries to come. Suddenly, a distant roar split the air, causing everyone to look up. High above, Rhaegal streaked through the sky, his green scales catching the fading sunlight. He banked left, circling the city with slow, powerful wing beats, then descended beyond the walls. Daenerys' heart gave a small leap of delight. Even after so many flights together, the sight of her dragons in flight never ceased to awe her. She knew that soon she would be feeding them, checking on any wounds or sore spots they might have. They were part of her daily routine, as essential to her as breathing. She gave Jorah and Grey Worm a nod. "I'll leave you to your lesson," she said. Jorah bowed. "Of course, Your Grace." Grey Worm saluted. "Your Grace." She turned and made her way out of the courtyard, feeling strangely grounded. This was her life now. No longer a frantic race to gather allies or burn cities in order to conquer a throne. Instead, she wore the crown and tended to the day-to-day demands of leadership. A gentler kind of strength was required here, one that tested her in ways she hadn't expected. As she walked toward the gate that led outside the city's walls, she spotted Missandei standing by one of the parapets, her robes a shimmering blue. Missandei brightened upon seeing Daenerys and hurried to intercept her. A loyal friend since Astapor, Missandei had grown from interpreter to trusted advisor, quietly steering Daenerys through diplomatic nuances. "Your Grace," Missandei greeted, falling in step. "I was just bringing some documents for you to review. Trade manifests, dispatches from the Reach, that sort of thing." Daenerys sighed, a playful tone in her voice. "I thought I might have at least one day without parchment." Missandei laughed softly. "Apologies, but you know these matters won't wait. The merchants clamor for the Queen's seal, especially on a day of festivities. They assume you'll be in a generous mood." "Nam?" Daenerys shook her head. "They might be right. I'm feeling benevolent." She glanced at the bundle of rolled parchment Missandei held in her arms. "Very well. I'll look them over when I return. I need to check on my dragons first." "Of course. Shall I accompany you?" Missandei asked. No, stay here. Enjoy the festival. I know how much you love hearing the music from your home islands." Missandei's eyes lit up. "I do. Thank you." She handed Daenerys a single piece of parchment. "But please read this one tonight if you can. It's from the Bank of Volantis. They've heard rumors that certain slaver factions are regrouping outside the old cities you liberated. I know you won't want to let that go unanswered." "Now." Daenerys felt her stomach tighten at the words, slaver factions. She had dismantled the slave trade in the major cities of Slaver's Bay, now called the Bay of Dragons, and enforced heavy penalties on anyone attempting to reinstate it. But she knew that old, entrenched systems did not vanish easily. Some people would always fight to regain their wealth and power built on the backs of chains. She accepted the parchment with a firm nod. "I'll read it carefully. Thank you, Missandei." They parted ways. Daenerys left the Red Keep in the city behind, escorted by a small retinue of guards. The crowds parted for her, some bowing, others simply staring at the woman who had come to rule them, and who commanded 3 living dragons. She felt the mixture of respect, curiosity, and lingering fear in their gazes. A single year was not enough to erase the centuries of Targaryen legend that had once burned King's Landing. But perhaps in time, they would trust that these dragons were not a herald of tyranny, but protectors of the realm. Outside the city walls sprawled a rolling plain, dotted with patches of forest and farmland. The wind here was fresher, carrying the scent of earth and grass. From a distance, she saw Drogon's black silhouette, far larger than Rhaegal or Viserion, perched on a rocky outcrop. A handful of Dothraki riders were nearby, tending to their horses. Smoke curled from Drogon's nostrils as he watched Daenerys approach. Rhaegal was further off, resting in a patch of sunlight, green scales gleaming. Viserion dozed near a grove of trees, pale wings folded. Their closeness to each other warmed Daenerys' heart. In the old days, she had sometimes feared the dragons might fight each other for dominance, but these 3 had coexisted peaceably enough. Each recognized her as their mother, and recognized Drogon as the largest and most protective. Though they had grown as well, Rhaegal and Viserion were formidable creatures, not to be trifled with. As Daenerys approached, Drogon made a low, rumbling sound, part greeting, part warning to the guards who followed her. She murmured softly in High Valyrian, a soothing chant that reminded him she was friend, not foe. The Dothraki riders stepped aside, bowing their heads in respect. They might not follow the gods of Westeros, but they revered Daenerys as the rider of dragons, a living cowl of unimaginable strength. She brushed her palm over Drogon's scaled flank, feeling the warmth that radiated from his body. "Hello, my sweet," she whispered in Valyrian. He snorted, exhaling a heated breath that ruffled her hair. Even after all these years, a flicker of caution remained. His immense power could be lethal if he ever turned on her. But he never did. She sensed his contentment as she scratched the ridges behind one of his horns. The dull tang of smoke clung to her nostrils. Moving on to Rhaegal, she checked a small scrape along his belly that had come from an awkward landing a few days prior. The cut looked to be healing well. Dragons had a resilience far beyond mortal creatures, but she fussed over them all the same, unwilling to risk infection. She murmured soothing words, and Rhaegal gave a rumble, blinking large eyes that glimmered like emeralds. She turned toward Viserion, who had stirred from his nap, and extended a hand so he could scent her. He lowered his head, allowing her to trace the pale scales along his jaw. "Each of you safe," she murmured, remembering the terror at the frozen lake so long ago. The Night King's spear might have ended one of them, changed the course of this entire realm. Instead, all three soared under the living sun. She closed her eyes, letting the relief of that memory wash over her, a blessing she never forgot. When she was satisfied that the dragons were well, she withdrew a few large hunks of salted goat from the saddlebags of the Dothraki and offered them to Drogon, who snapped them up with a mighty crunch. She watched with a fond smile, thinking about how hungry they had been as fledglings. Now they were so massive that each meal was a feast. While the dragons fed, Daenerys walked with the Dothraki who had come to the city for the festival. One of them, Ago, a tall man with braided hair, spoke passable common tongue after months of immersion. He told her of the Khalasar's hunts across the Crown Lands, how they tried to avoid trampling farmers' fields, and how some in the Khalasar wished to travel further west to see the sea at Lannisport. Daenerys listened attentively, offering to arrange safe passage if needed. The Dothraki were proud, but they appreciated that she facilitated their movements in a land where the lords might otherwise challenge them as invaders. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the plain, Daenerys realized the festival in King's Landing would soon culminate in fireworks, an innovation borrowed from Essos, small bursts of powder that bloomed in colored light. She wanted to be back in the city before they began. With a few final words to Drogon and the Dothraki, she headed back toward the gates. Her guards followed, torches flickering in the evening breeze. By the time she returned to the Red Keep, the sky was a tapestry of deep purples and oranges. The great hall had partially emptied, as many guests had ventured outside to see the fireworks display. In the palace courtyard, braziers lit the paths, and the sound of excited chatter mingled with the calls of vendors, hawking sweetbreads and candied fruit. Small folk, granted special permission to enter the outer wards of the castle, gathered in clusters, eyes shining at the novelty of celebrating alongside nobility. Jon spotted Daenerys arriving and wove through the crowd toward her, relief softening his features. "I was about to send someone after you," he said. "We're nearly ready for the fireworks. Tyrion has been fussing with the alchemists all day to ensure they're safe." She raised a brow. "Safe, are they? I recall Qyburn's old experiments with wildfire in the city." Jon grimaced at the memory. "That's why Tyrion took such precautions. He doesn't want a single spark to risk the city. The alchemists have assured him it's only small amounts of black powder, not wildfire. Just enough for a few bursts of color." Daenerys relaxed, letting him take her hand as they found a vantage point near the parapet. From here, they could see over the city roofs to where the fireworks would be launched outside the walls, near the bay. Hundreds of tiny lights dotted the darkness, torches, lanterns, the occasional flicker of cooking fires. The city had endured so much, but tonight it glowed like a beacon of hope. She could almost imagine the old Targaryen kings looking down in approval, though she hoped she would be a better monarch than many of her ancestors. She glanced at Jon. "You think everything is truly all right?" He met her gaze. "We've come far. The realm is healing. We'll have challenges, but yes, I think it's better than it's been in generations. A large part of that is thanks to you, and your dragons." Then, she felt a soft pang in her chest, gratitude braided with love. Their bond had grown in quiet moments, in shared battles, and in the forging of a new world. They still carried secrets, like the question of Jon's parentage that Bran alone truly understood. But Daenerys had chosen not to dwell on it, not to let it mar the unity they had achieved. She squeezed Jon's hand gently. Suddenly, a whizzing sound tore through the air, followed by a burst of vivid green light that exploded above the harbor. The crowd gasped, some cheering, children squealing with delight. Another flash, red this time, blossomed next to the first, then scattered into sparks that floated down before vanishing into the night. The sky lit up in a rapid series of pops and bright trails, drawing exclamations of wonder from across the city. Daenerys felt a surge of childlike joy. She'd seen many marvels in her life: dragons hatching from eggs, an undead army crossing a frozen lake, cities liberated from chains. But fireworks were new. They reminded her that life could be beautiful, in simpler ways too. She laughed softly as a particularly loud boom made onlookers jump, then turned to each other, sharing in the moment. Jon watched her with a gentle smile. The green and red lights reflected in his eyes. "It's good to see you happy," he said softly, his voice nearly drowned by the thunder of another explosion overhead. She leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "I am," she confessed. "It's still strange to be able to breathe, to imagine a future, but I'm happy." They stood that way for a time, letting the fireworks fill the sky with color, letting the city's cheers wash over them. Behind them, across the courtyard, Tyrion raised a toast with a few lords who had parted ways from the main feast. Sir Davos shared a laugh with a blacksmith from Flea Bottom he recognized from the war effort. Gendry, elevated to Lord Baratheon of Storm's End, hoisted a mug with Tormund Giantsbane, who journeyed down from the north just to see the festival. The large man was roaring with amusement at these tiny glowing blasts in the sky. For Daenerys, it felt like the first time she'd seen the realm truly exhale. The Great War was over, the crown was secured, and the climate of fear had shifted into cautious optimism. Even if she knew storms might come, the remnants of slaverholds in Essos, pockets of discontent in Westeros, tonight felt like a tribute to all they'd endured. Her dragons soared overhead, guardians of a kingdom forging a new identity. Eventually, the fireworks ended in a grand finale of gold and purple sparks that cascaded like a shimmering waterfall across the sky. The city erupted in applause, a million voices merging into one triumphant sound. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting the resonance fill her ears, anchor her in the moment. When she opened them again, the darkness of night had returned, but it felt less menacing than before. She could still see the faint outlines of the dragons drifting on the wind above the towers, watchful. As the crowd began to disperse, returning to the warmth of the halls or drifting home through the city streets, Jon and Daenerys lingered by the parapet. The ocean breeze tugged at her hair, carrying the smell of salt and something else, intangible, like the hush of possibility. Jon turned to her, stepping close enough that she could see the flicker of torchlight in his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, smiling. "For bed?" He laughed under his breath. "For that, too. But I meant for what comes next, after these celebrations. The realm wants leadership. Your leadership. Sometimes I think the war against the dead was easier in a way. That was a clear enemy. This is 1,000 small challenges, all at once." "No." She considered his words. "I know," she said. "But we have a chance to make something better. Not just a monarchy that rules by fear. A realm built on mutual respect, where old grudges fade over time. I won't be naive. There will always be those who seek power for themselves or try to break the peace. But we've proven that, together, we can face even the unthinkable." "Meow." He reached up, brushing a stray strand of her silver hair behind her ear. "We're in this together, you and I." The vow in his voice was clear. Daenerys felt that vow echo in her own heart. "Always," she whispered, then kissed him softly. The taste of the evening air lingered. The memory of fireworks glowed behind her eyelids. When she pulled back, her breath mingled with his, warm in the cool night. "Let's go," she said, a quiet invitation in her tone. They returned to the Red Keep's private corridors, winding through passages lit by torches sputtering in sconces. The festival still raged in the great hall, likely to continue late into the night. But Daenerys' mind was already turning over the scroll Missandei had given her, the dispatch from Volantis. The wheels of rule never fully stopped. She recalled Tyrion's remark on more than one occasion, that she had the heart of a queen who never truly sleeps. Later that night, after changing into more comfortable garments, She sat at a small desk in her solar, a single candle illuminating the parchment. John dozed on a nearby chaise, arms folded, boots kicked off. She could see the faint lines of weariness in his face, but also the ease that came from a day well spent. Outside, the city had quieted to a low murmur, occasional bursts of laughter drifting on the wind. She unrolled the letter from Volantis. Its writer was a certain Murharo Ko, a merchant who had once traded in slaves but claimed to have reformed. The letter detailed rumors of a secret conglomerate of former slave masters gathering near the ruins of old Volantis, seeking to raise funds for a new mercenary army to retake the Bay of Dragons. Nothing was confirmed, but the rumors were alarming. Daenerys felt anger coil in her belly. After all the blood shed to free those cities, there would always be men trying to restore chains. Her first instinct was to set sail, to snuff out any such rebellion before it festered. But her duties in Westeros were paramount, and she had promised stability here. Would it be wise, or even feasible, to lead an army across the sea again, possibly leaving the realm vulnerable? She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. She would need Tyrion's counsel, Missandeia's knowledge of Essos, Grey Worm's perspective. A new plan might be required, perhaps sending envoys or funneling gold to loyal allies in those regions who could root out the slavers. In any case, it was a reminder that her war had never truly ended, that the old world order refused to die quietly. She set aside the letter for now, returning to the present moment. Tomorrow would be soon enough to gather her counsel. Rising quietly so as not to wake John, she moved over to the window. The candle's glow flickered, causing her shadow to dance on the stone wall. Gazing out, she saw Rhaegal drifting across the moon, a dark silhouette against the silver orb. Her heart clenched with love and pride. She thought of the day they'd soared together, each dragon alight with joy, the wind in her hair. She closed her eyes, recalling how the north's endless white had become a new horizon for her flight. Yes, she thought. Challenges loomed. The old masters in Essos, the complexities of forging alliances in Westeros, the lingering tension with what remained of House Lannister's loyalists, the possibility that Euron Greyjoy might resurface, though rumor said he had fled east and vanished. The Iron Bank was always a factor. The faith of the people in her might waver if harvests went poorly, or if local lords felt neglected. Ruling a united kingdom was a greater test than any she had faced on the battlefield. Yet she would not shrink from it. She was the Dragon Queen, mother of 3 living wonders, breaker of chains, and the realm's protector. She had a partner who stood with her, a council that supported her, and a deep reservoir of determination forged in the fires of war. Feeling a wave of affection, she turned from the window and moved to Jon's side. He stirred, blinking awake when she placed a soft hand on his shoulder. "Come," she said gently. "You'll be more comfortable in bed." He rubbed the back of his neck, yawning. "Did I fall asleep?" She nodded, a hint of amusement touching her lips. "Only briefly." He rose, stretching the stiffness from his limbs, and followed her through an adjoining door to the royal bedchamber. It was a spacious room, dominated by a large bed draped in velvets, with a tapestry of Targaryen heraldry on one wall. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets a maid had placed under the pillows. Daenerys helped Jon remove his leather jerkin, and he, in turn, loosened the ties of her robe. Their eyes locked in a moment of quiet understanding. There was comfort here. Trust. No grand ceremony, no fear or uncertainty, just the ease of closeness after a long day. She slid under the covers, and Jon joined her, the sheets cool against their skin. The bustle of the castle seemed far away, muffled by thick walls. Outside the night stretched on, but Daenerys felt a sense of warmth despite the darkness. She curled against Jon, letting his heartbeat soothe the last edges of her tension. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges to face. For now, she allowed herself the simple pleasure of drifting towards sleep, a queen who finally had the space to dream of a future, rather than dreading what threat might march upon her doorstep at dawn. She dreamed of dragons soaring over a lush green land, free and unafraid. She dreamed of children's laughter echoing in a courtyard, of fields in bloom, of a realm forging new traditions in place of old grudges. In these dreams, the crown on her head did not weigh her down, and the scars of the past no longer bled. She dreamed of forging pacts across the sea, of seeing the Bay of Dragons remain free from chains. And when she woke, in the pre-dawn light that tinged the horizon, she felt a quiet certainty inside her chest. The realm was not perfect, but it lived in possibility, and that was enough to face whatever might come next. A few days later, the festival's aftermath lingered in the air, with the city abuzz from the memory of fireworks and feasts. Yet, the daily chores of governance resumed in earnest. Daenerys summoned her closest advisors to the council chamber. Tyrion, Hand of the Queen; Missandei, her principal counselor on matters of Essos; Sir Davos Seaworth, whom she had come to rely on for honest insights; Grey Worm, commander of the Unsullied; and of course Jon Snow, who officially held the title of Warden of the North, but advised on all matters near and far. Seated around an ornate wooden table, they studied maps and read the letter from Volantis detailing the rumored resurgence of slaver factions. Tyrion tapped his fingers on the tabletop. We know from experience that the slave trade doesn't die simply because a queen declares it so. It's deeply profitable for those in power. They'll try to rebuild it if they think you're distracted by ruling Westeros. Missandei's brow furrowed. Some of my people still write to me from Neath and the Bay of Dragons. They say that most local governors remain loyal to you, eager to trade with Westeros as a legitimate enterprise. But if these old slaver lords manage to raise private armies, they might stage a coup in one of the lesser cities first, then expand. Grey Worm's lips thinned. We should send a force to destroy them at once. I know the terrain, the old walls. Give me a legion of Unsullied. We'll smash them. They'll learn fear again. Daenerys felt an old fierceness rise in her chest. Part of her agreed wholeheartedly. A swift show of strength might deter a larger rebellion. But then she recalled the cost of war. And if they hide among the local population? She asked quietly. We risk harming the very people we swore to protect. Also, many Unsullied have built new lives here. Taking them away might weaken our presence in Westeros. Jon folded his arms. Could we use a smaller elite force, just to gather intelligence first? We should confirm these rumors before we commit to an invasion. It might be a ruse meant to lure you away from Westeros. Tyrion nodded. A ruse orchestrated by whom, though? One of the exiled Lannister loyalists, or simply slavers seeking an advantage? Either way, caution is wise. We don't want to uproot the entire realm for a rumor. Sir Davos spoke up. Why not send envoys who are both familiar with Essos and can keep an ear to the ground? Perhaps a small discreet group, not an entire army. Then? Daenerys looked at Missandei, who inclined her head. I can help coordinate such a mission. I know people in Volantis, in Meereen, in Astapor. My contacts could guide a small team. We could include a handful of Unsullied to ensure their protection. Grey Worm agreed. But not so many that it looks like an invasion. Good, Daenerys said. Let's do it. Organize a small expedition. Gather information. If the threat is real, we'll decide then how to respond. But I won't allow the slavers to rise again. If we must show force, we will. Then? The council murmured consensus, and Missandei began jotting notes on a parchment. Daenerys cast a glance at Jon, who seemed pensive. You have concerns? She prompted. He met her gaze. We stretched thin, is all. The realm is stable, but we still have to guard our southern coast, watch for Ironborn raids. We can manage it. But if a major conflict erupts in Essos, we'll need a strategy that won't leave Westeros undefended. Daenerys knew he was right. We'll plan for that as well. Our alliances here are stronger now. We might call upon the Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands to help maintain order if some of our forces are overseas. Nenderanawar. Tyrion piped in, and as your hand, I can ensure a robust supply chain for any troops we send abroad. Although I suspect we'll rely more on local allies in Essos to handle the bulk of any fight. Many freedmen there remain loyal to you. They won't want to see the slavers return. Then we have a plan, Daenerys said, voice firm. Missandei, Grey Worm, gather your lists of potential allies in the Bay of Dragons. Choose a capable commander to lead the expedition. You have my permission to select whomever you deem most fit. Brief me again before they depart. Damn. They nodded, and the meeting moved on to other matters. The replenishment of the royal coffers, the forging of trade deals with Dorne, the construction of new roads that Tycho Nestoris from the Iron Bank had financed. Some discussion arose about re-establishing a Grand Council of Lords and Ladies to advise the Crown, a more formal structure that could one day break the cycle of war. Daenerys, mindful of her vow to break the wheel, was intrigued. She believed in voices beyond those of the great houses, including more representatives, merchants, skilled tradesmen, lesser lords, might foster a sense of shared governance. Such a notion verged on radical, but the realm had been upended before. Why not transform it further for the good of all? When the meeting ended, the council dispersed, each member taking up their tasks. Tyrion lingered a moment to speak with Daenerys about the Iron Bank's interest in fostering a canal system in the Reach. Jon paused to speak quietly with Grey Worm about possible recruits for the Essos expedition. Eventually, the room emptied, leaving Daenerys alone for a moment to review the notes Missandei had left behind. Her mind drifted to the day beyond the wall. How she had nearly lost Viserion to the Night King's spear. If that had happened, the entire war might have ended differently. An undead dragon turning on them, tearing through armies of men. The chill of that memory haunted her still. Yet it also steeled her resolve. She had 3 dragons, and they would not be used to burn cities indiscriminately, but they were a formidable deterrent to any who believed her weak. She might pursue diplomacy first, but if forced, she would act decisively. A knock sounded at the door. She looked up. Arya Stark slipped in, quiet as a ghost. Daenerys had grown accustomed to her silent entrances, though she still found it uncanny. "Arya," she greeted. "You move so quietly, it's a wonder you don't startle the guards." Arya shrugged, her pale eyes flicking around. "I think they're used to me by now. Jon said you might have a job for me." Daenerys leaned back in her chair. "Possibly. A mission to Essos. A small team is going to investigate rumors of slaver activity. You'd be perfect for gathering information undetected, if you're willing." Arya's lips curved slightly. "Sounds interesting. I've been wanting to see Essos. I was only there briefly in Braavos, but I have my own history there. Could be useful." Daenerys nodded. "Missandei and Grey Worm are coordinating. You'd be under their command, though I suspect no one truly commands you but yourself. Still, we want a diplomatic approach first. No needless bloodshed." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Diplomatic. Right. White. I can be quiet, or I can be deadly. Whichever's needed." "And no." Daenerys allowed a small smile. She had come to respect Arya's sharp edges, her unwavering loyalty to her family, and her refusal to bow to conventional expectations. "I know you can. Just be sure to keep me informed." Arya nodded, then gave Daenerys a more thoughtful look. "Do you ever think about traveling there yourself? Revisiting the Bay of Dragons? Showing them you haven't abandoned them?" A flicker of longing crossed Daenerys' face. "Sometimes. I miss it. The warmth, the sense of purpose I had, freeing slaves. But my place is here, on the Iron Throne. If the threat proves serious, I might sail. For now I stay." "Then?" Arya accepted that with a curt nod. "Then I'll go in your stead." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, glancing over her shoulder. "I wanted to say something else." Her voice held an unusual hesitation. "Thank you. For being good to Jon. He's happier now, I can tell." Daenerys felt a gentle warmth bloom in her chest. He's everything good in this world. I'm the one who should thank him. Arya nodded once, her expression softening, then vanished out the door. Daenerys exhaled, a sense of calm settling over her. Even Arya Stark, once so wary of Daenerys, had found a space of trust. That was a victory worth savoring. In the weeks that followed, preparations for the Essos expedition moved swiftly. Grey Worm handpicked a select group of Unsullied, each adept in stealth and infiltration, as well as open combat. Missandei wrote letters to her contacts in Meereen, advising them of the need for secrecy. Arya made no fuss about the arrangement. She prepared her gear in silence, slipping out at odd hours to practice with throwing knives or to research old maps of Essos. A few experienced sailors from King's Landing were hired to pilot a swift ship, the Silver Star, nimble enough to outrun pirates or other threats. While that operation took shape, life in the capital proceeded with an undercurrent of cautious optimism. Lords brought petitions daily, one seeking redress for a border dispute, another complaining of tariffs. Daenerys discovered that the politics of peace could be as complex as war, if far less bloody. She spent hours with scribes and lords, adjudicating disagreements. Jon assisted, using his experience with northern disputes to recommend equitable solutions. Tyrion oversaw the kingdom's finances, ensuring taxes were fairer than in previous regimes. Gendry Baratheon traveled to Storm's End, fortifying the old stronghold in case of future strife, but pledged unwavering loyalty to the crown. Sansa Stark returned to Winterfell, where she managed the North's affairs, ensuring smooth communications between her region and the royal seat. Occasional ravens arrived, updating Daenerys on how the northern lords responded to new trade deals or invitations to discuss broader governance. Meanwhile, in the city, Jaime Lannister found a strange new purpose, offering his sword and strategic mind to Daenerys' rule. Brienne of Tarth, recognized for her valor, had become a commander of the Queen's Guard, an honor never before given to a woman, but widely respected given her prowess. As the expedition's departure date neared, Daenerys and Jon walked the docks of King's Landing to inspect the Silver Star. It was a sleek vessel, painted with a faint silver shimmer that caught the sunlight. Sailors bustled about, loading crates of supplies, barrels of water, and small chests of valuables to trade for information. Grey Worm oversaw the loading, stoic and methodical, checking every detail twice. Arya leaned against a coil of rope, arms crossed. She wore practical leathers and a cloak of dark gray that would blend easily in dim streets or open night skies. Her dagger was strapped to her hip, a second blade hidden behind her back, if Daenerys guessed correctly. She stared out at the water, which lapped against the hull with quiet persistence. Daenerys joined her, letting the breeze lift a few strands of her pale hair. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked gently. "It may be dangerous." Arya shrugged. "Danger doesn't scare me. I want to see more of the world. This is as good a chance as any." Jon approached, giving Arya a brief, tight smile. "Remember to send word if you learn anything concrete. We can't help if we don't know what's happening." Wow. She rolled her eyes a bit, the way younger siblings do. Yes. Don't worry, big brother. I won't vanish forever." Jon gave her a sideways hug, brief but heartfelt. "Safe travels, Arya." He let her go, turning to Grey Worm, who approached with a list of last-minute checks. "You'll escort them until they make land in Volantis?" Grey Worm nodded. "Yes. We'll head to Volantis first, gauge the situation, then split into smaller groups if needed. We know how to move unseen, if that's what's required." Daenerys clasped Grey Worm's arm in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for leading this. I'm entrusting you with more than just intelligence gathering. You'll represent me among friends in Essos. Show them we haven't forgotten them, but we also don't seek to rule them with an iron fist." Grey Worm inclined his head. "Understood, Your Grace. If they remain loyal to you, we will help them. If they join the slavers—" He left the implication hanging, but Daenerys knew the meaning. The Unsullied would punish betrayers swiftly. With that, Final farewells were exchanged. Arya offered a lopsided grin and a wave before disappearing into the bowels of the ship. Grey Worm directed the last crates aboard, then followed. Ropes were cast off, sails unfurled, and the Silver Star glided away from the dock, prow cutting through the sparkling waters of Blackwater Bay. Daenerys and Jon watched from the pier, each lost in their own thoughts about what might unfold across the sea. "I hope they'll be all right," Daenerys murmured as the ship diminished in the distance. Jon slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "They will. Arya survived worse than any of us can imagine, and Grey Worm is unstoppable in battle." She nodded, letting his reassurance steady her. "True. I suppose I'll just worry until we hear from them." A small sigh escaped her. "Sometimes I wonder, Jon, if we made the right choice in not returning to Essos ourselves, ensuring the Bay of Dragons remained free. Perhaps if we had gone right after the war, stamped out the last embers of slavery, none of this would fester." "Then who would have ruled Westeros?" Jon asked quietly, searching her face. "Cersei. Another pretender. We had to secure the realm, Daenerys. We did what was necessary." "Nemshao." She squeezed his hand in acknowledgement. "I know, you're right. But I can't help wanting to do everything at once." She paused, gazing out at the bay. "I was the breaker of chains once. I still am." Jon turned her to face him gently. "You broke the biggest chains of all, the wheel that kept Westeros in endless war, and the threat of the dead. That's no small feat." She felt tears prick her eyes, a rush of gratitude for his unwavering faith in her. "Thank you," she whispered, letting him press his forehead to hers. The city moved around them, dockworkers hauling cargo, gulls crying overhead, but in that moment, she felt only the warmth of Jon's presence. They returned to the Red Keep, going about their duties, but a sliver of her thoughts remained with that ship until it vanished into the horizon. Days turned into weeks, then into a month. She found comfort in her routine: morning flights with Drogon or Rhaegal, afternoons spent in council chambers, evenings writing letters or entertaining lords and ladies seeking her ear. Jon visited the north occasionally, checking on matters with Sansa, but always came back to her side. The city flourished in the new peace. Markets thrived, and the small folk found some measure of prosperity they had lacked for generations. At last, ravens arrived from Volantis. The news was cautious, but not dire. Arya and Grey Worm had made contact with local freedmen, many of whom remained staunchly loyal to Daenerys. They confirmed that a small conspiracy of old slaver families was indeed gathering coin and mercenaries, though their strength remained uncertain. The conspirators used secret safe houses, shifting locations often. Some suspicion arose that they might attempt to hire the Golden Company, but that famed sellsword army had scattered after Cersei's defeat, with many members returning to Essos disillusioned. For now, the threat seemed contained, but the letter warned it could grow if unchecked. Daenerys read the Raven scroll with a mixture of relief, no immediate catastrophe, and anger that these slavers dared try to re-establish their trade. She penned a measured reply, urging them to maintain vigilance, gather more intelligence, and offer support to local allies. If the conspiracy escalated, she would consider sending more forces. For now, she trusted Grey Worm's discretion and Arya's skill. She prayed it would be enough. As autumn deepened, the realm witnessed the final fading of the long winter that had nearly destroyed them. Fields that once lay frozen under mounds of snow burst with harvest, surprising even the old farmers with bountiful yields. The northern lords sent wagons of grain to King's Landing in gratitude for the Queen's fair taxes and rebuilt roads. The Riverlands recovered from years of strife, their villages slowly repopulating. Torment Giantsbane wrote from the far north, describing how small communities of free folk and northerners had taken root near the Gift, making new lives in relative peace. All the while, Daenerys felt the quiet beat of time passing. She and Jon rarely spoke of an heir, though the topic lingered unspoken between them. Once, the question would have terrified her, but her days of seeing entire armies crumble before the undead had changed her perspective. Life was precious, and building a family might be the next step in forging a lasting peace. Yet she felt no urgency, The realm was still so newly united, and their partnership was more about forging a better world than about continuing a dynasty. If, one day, an heir came, that child would inherit a realm hopefully free from the torments their parents had known. One evening, after a long day of petitions and meetings, Daenerys found herself alone in the royal library. Though not as grand as the citadels in Old Town, the Red Keep's library boasted an impressive collection of tomes and scrolls detailing Targaryen history, the geography of Essos, and even some manuscripts from the Age of Heroes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the shelves. She ran her fingers along the spines of old volumes, pausing at a history of Aegon's conquest. Opening it, she saw an illustration of Balerion the Black Dread, monstrous and terrifying, overshadowing entire armies. She traced the outline of the dragon's wings. How different her own reign felt. She had used fear when necessary, it was true. She had burned those who refused to yield in the early days of her campaign. But the years and the wars had tempered her. She wanted something more for this realm. As she flipped through pages of recorded conquests, she found herself thinking about how those who ruled by fear alone often left behind ashes and ruin. That was not her legacy. Hers would be one of forging alliances, protecting the vulnerable, and bridging worlds. She closed the book with a quiet resolve to keep pursuing that path, no matter how difficult. A soft knock sounded on the library's door. "Come in," she called. Tyrion poked his head in, an apologetic grin on his face. "I heard you might be here. Sorry to disturb your grace, but we've received another raven from Essos. Urgent." Her heart skipped a beat. "From Arya? Grey Worm?" He nodded, stepping inside and handing her the folded parchment. "Yes, from Arya, though Grey Worm likely co-wrote it. Looks like they've uncovered more details." "Nah." Daenerys opened it quickly, scanning the elegant script that Missandei must have taught Arya to write with such clarity. "Your Grace, we have found proof the slaver lords plan to strike at Meereen in 3 months' time. They've hired a small but formidable army of sellswords, possibly remnants of the Golden Company or other free companies. Their aim is to capture the city's ports before the Freedmen's Council can rally a defense. They believe you are too occupied ruling Westeros to intervene. We've identified several ringleaders with bases in and around Volantis and Nugis. If we move swiftly, we can disrupt their plans. But we are few. We request reinforcements, or at least your formal order to rally local allies to battle. Send word swiftly. We remain loyal. Arya Stark, Grey Worm." Daenerys gripped the parchment, anger kindling within her. Tyrion watched her expression, his eyes flicking from the scroll to her face. "If they capture Meereen," she said softly, "they'll enslave thousands." Tyrion nodded. "They'll try, no doubt. But Meereen's Freedmen's Council won't go quietly. Still, they might be overwhelmed without our aid." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "We have to act. I swore to protect those cities, to ensure slavery stayed dead. We can't let these slavers retake Meereen." Tyrion hesitated. "And what of Westeros? You can't abandon the realm, not now. But you do have 3 dragons, and loyal armies." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. "I don't have to abandon Westeros, but I can't turn my back on Essos either." She opened her eyes, locking onto Tyrion's. "What if I send a portion of my forces, led by trusted commanders? I could fly there with 2 dragons, maybe. Leave 1 dragon behind with Jon to ensure no one in Westeros tries to exploit my absence. Or do I risk going in person?" "Bend show." Tyrion paced, thinking aloud. "If you send an army without yourself, it might seem less daunting to the slavers, and your presence often changes battles before they even begin. On the other hand, leaving Westeros physically might embolden any lurking rebels here." She took a steadying breath. "I'll speak with Jon and the others. But my heart tells me I must go. I promised those people freedom. If I do nothing, I break my word, and they suffer." "Nemdero." Tyrion sighed but nodded. "I understand. I'll support whatever you decide. If you do sail, we'll ensure the realm's stability in your absence. You can leave a strong regent behind. Daenerys' mind raced through possibilities. Her duty to Westeros weighed against her vow to liberate Essos. She realized, not without irony, that the wheel she'd once aimed to break was now her burden. She was responsible for 2 continents. But she would not let that tear her apart. She would face it, as she always had, with determination and cunning. She thanked Tyrion and hurried to find Jon. She found him in the castle courtyard, sparring with a few northern soldiers who had come south. Snow was no longer falling, but the chill in the air reminded everyone winter had only recently passed. Jon's breath misted as he parried an attack, then disarmed his opponent deftly. Catching sight of her, he lowered his sword, curiosity lighting his features. "You look serious," he said, stepping aside to let the soldier rest. "What is it?" She pressed the scroll into his hands. Arya and Grey Worm uncovered a plot to retake Meereen. They're requesting reinforcements, perhaps even me. Now. Jon read swiftly, frowning. "So it begins," he muttered. He set the parchment aside. "We knew this might happen someday." She nodded, meeting his gaze. "I'm inclined to go, in person. With 2 dragons and a portion of our army. I'll leave 1 dragon and the majority of our troops here under your command. Enough to keep the peace. We can't lose Meereen, Jon. We can't let slavery rise again." He exhaled. "I understand. But if you go, you'll be gone for months, maybe longer. And who knows what pockets of unrest might bubble up here. But I also see that you gave your word to those cities. You can't break it. Now." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Will you remain here, to rule in my stead?" His dark gray eyes flickered. "If that's what you ask of me, yes. But I want to be sure you'll be safe." She managed a soft laugh. "I have 2 dragons. That's usually enough to tip the balance." He smiled ruefully, stepping closer. "If you do this, go quickly, and crush them before the war drags on. Then come back. Westeros needs you too. Now." She rested her hand against his cheek, feeling the stubble under her palm. "I promise I won't linger once the threat is contained, but I have to do this." Jon leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "I know. I'd do the same. I just... be careful." She nodded, throat tight with a mingling of resolve and heartbreak at the thought of leaving him. But the decision was clear. If she claimed to be breaker of chains for all people, she could not stand idle. With Jon's blessing and Tyrion's counsel, she began assembling the expedition. Soon, the capital was awash in preparations. Ships were commissioned, provisions gathered, a small but elite force selected from unsullied Dothraki and loyal Westerosi knights. Lady Brienne would remain in King's Landing to command the Queen's Guard, while Jaime Lannister offered to sail with Daenerys, adding his experience. She accepted, trusting that Jaime's redemption had been genuine. Sir Davos would stay, assisting Tyrion in governance and trade. Viserion and Rhaegal would accompany her, while Drogon remained perched in the capital's outskirts, a reminder to any who might challenge Jon's authority as regent. The day of departure arrived under a sky streaked with thin clouds. The harbor bustled with sailors, soldiers, and curious onlookers. Daenerys donned practical riding leathers and a thick cloak. She stood at the quay, facing Jon. The hush between them spoke of all the words they had already shared. Behind them, 2 dragons soared near the masts of the waiting ships, while the rest of her forces finished loading. Tyrion and Missandei were double-checking manifests. Arya and Grey Worm waited in Essos, expecting her arrival. Jon clasped her hands, his grip strong. "Rule wisely over there," he said, half teasing. "Remember, you're still a queen, and they'll rely on you." She managed a small smile, though tears threatened. "I will, and you rule wisely here. If any lords give you trouble, remind them the dragons are never far." A shadow of a grin crossed his face. "I'll do that." Then his voice softened. "I love you." She leaned in, capturing his lips in a fierce, brief kiss. She tasted salt and the memory of the wind. Pulling back, she replied, "And I love you. I'll return as soon as I can." He nodded, releasing her with visible reluctance. She turned, summoning her resolve, and boarded the flagship, a sleek vessel reinforced for the open sea. Tyrion, Jaime, and a contingent of knights followed. Missandei would remain behind to assist Jon, given her role in administrating the capital. The great anchor was hoisted, sails snapped in the breeze, and slowly the ship drifted from the dock. The clang of rigging and the call of sailors filled the air. From the prow, Daenerys watched the skyline of King's Landing recede. She saw the silhouettes of the Red Keep, the great sept's ruins still in partial reconstruction, the city walls that held thousands of lives. Within those walls stood Jon, the man she trusted beyond measure, who now wore the mantle of Steward King in her stead. Overhead, Viserion and Rhaegal roared, as if announcing to the realm that the Dragon Queen was on the move once more. Once they were well out to sea, the coastline shrank into a hazy line, and Daenerys felt the old rush of salt wind against her face, the promise of distant shores. She looked at Tyrion, who leaned on the rail near her. "It feels like old times." Crossing the sea to free people from tyranny. He inclined his head. "With the difference that you're sailing as an established queen now, not an exiled princess." She smiled. "Yes, that does make quite a difference." Jaime Lannister approached, eyes scanning the horizon. "The men are ready for battle," he said quietly. "And your dragons overhead will strike fear into any sellswords who dare cross our path." Daenerys set her jaw. "Let them fear. That's what they earn by planning to enslave innocents. But we'll offer mercy if they stand down." Tyrion looked between them, an odd glimmer in his mismatched eyes. "Then let us hope reason prevails. Otherwise, they'll taste dragon fire." The wind caught the sails, propelling them further from Westeros. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting her senses fill with the sound of waves lapping the hull, the distant caw of seabirds, the flutter of the sail's canvas. She recalled the last time she had sailed to wage war. Her heart had been full of fury at the injustices of the slave trade. Now she felt an even deeper conviction, shaped by the knowledge of what it meant to protect people from unimaginable threats, whether the dead beyond the wall or the greedy men who would put chains on children. Far above, Viserion screeched, then dove toward the water, skimming the surface before ascending in a shimmering arc. Rhaegal followed suit, their wings stirring up white foam. Daenerys watched them with pride. They had survived battles and nightmares. They would face whatever lay ahead, and she would be there to guide them, to protect the innocent, to keep the promise she had once made to a world bound in chains. Thus, the new campaign began, an echo of the wars she had fought before. Yet this time, her vantage was different. She sailed not as an outcast, but as a queen known and respected across 2 continents, carrying the weight of unity forged in blood and fire. Behind her, Westeros stood free of the dead. Before her, Essos beckoned with old ghosts of slavery rising once more. She was Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, the unburnt, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, queen of the 7 kingdoms, and she would not let the world she fought to save collapse back into darkness, no matter how far she had to sail or how many battles she had to wage. And as the prow of her ship broke the waves, she felt certain that, together with her dragons and her loyal allies, the flame of hope would burn across the seas, banishing the final vestiges of old tyranny once and for all.